The cobblestones outside Ashford Cathedral ran black with slush, and something darker when they dragged Lady Seraphina Vale down the steps like she was already dead. Her wedding cloak, the expensive one with silver threading that cost more than a farmer made in 5 years, tore against the stone. Snow fell hard enough to sting. The nobles watched from their carriages, breath fogging the windows, hands folded like they were praying when really they were just counting the minutes until the show ended and they could return to warm fires and warmer wine. She'd lost her husband 3 weeks prior. Lord Edmund Vale, found crushed beneath a support beam in the Greystone mines, the Royal Consortium's prize investment. Suspicious didn't begin to cover it. The beam had been inspected 2 days before. Edmund had been asking questions about worker deaths and missing ledgers. Then he was dead, and Seraphina was 6 months pregnant with their 4th child, and the aristocracy smelled blood in the water. They called it moral transgression, said the child couldn't possibly be Edmund's, not with how quickly she'd conceived after their last. The church stammered about investigations into the Vale finances, about Edmund's debts, about impropriety. All lies wrapped in ecclesiastical language, but lies with teeth. The kind that destroyed families and seized estates. Her 3 children stood against the cathedral wall, shivering. Thomas, barely 8. Catherine, 6. Little Margaret, 4 years old and crying so hard she couldn't breathe. No one moved to help them. That was the part that carved itself into memory, the part that mattered. These people, these nobles in their furs and jewels, they watched children freeze and did nothing because doing nothing was safer than mercy. Then the black carriage arrived, and everything changed. The crowd parted without being asked. They knew the crest. Everyone knew the crest. A wolf's head in silver against a field of black, crowned with iron thorns. House Draven. The Northern Territories. The place where rebellion went to die and enemies disappeared into frozen ground. Duke Lucian Draven stepped onto the cathedral steps like he owned them, which legally he didn't, but authority isn't about legality. It's about who's willing to enforce consequences. He wore charcoal wool that cost more than the carriage, tailored to hide weapons but not his build. The scar cutting from his left temple to his jaw made him look like something carved from violence itself. 16 years he'd served the crown as its primary inquisitor. 16 years of interrogations, executions, political purges. They called him the Iron Wolf of Blackmere. And it wasn't a compliment. He looked at Seraphina bleeding in the snow, at her children crying against the wall, and his expression didn't change. That was the terrifying part. No anger, no disgust, just calculation, cold and absolute. Father Gregorius, the cathedral's head priest, stepped forward with his hands raised in blessing or surrender, hard to tell which. Your Grace, this is church business. The woman stands accused of... I don't recall asking your opinion, Lucian said quietly. The priest's mouth worked like a fish drowning in air. The Duke walked past him, stopped beside Seraphina, and looked down at her like he was evaluating livestock. She met his eyes anyway, even bleeding, even ruined. Pride was all she had left. Can you stand? He asked. Her voice came out steady despite everything. I can, then stand. She did. Slowly, using the cathedral wall for support, but she did it. The crowd murmured. Lucian ignored them completely. He turned to her children instead. Your names. Thomas spoke first, trying to sound brave and failing. Thomas Vale, Your Grace, this is Catherine and Margaret. Come here. The boy hesitated. Lucian didn't repeat himself. He never repeated himself. Thomas took his sister's hands and walked forward, and the Duke examined them the same way he'd examined their mother, looking for weakness, for defects, for reasons to walk away. He found none. The carriage, he said to no one in particular. His driver appeared instantly, opening the door. Lucian looked at Seraphina again. You and your children will come with me. This is not a request. Father Gregorius found his voice, high and desperate. Your Grace, the accusations must be investigated. The Church has authority in matters of... The Church, Lucian said, has authority over souls. I'm concerned with bodies. Specifically, I'm concerned with preventing 4 more bodies from freezing to death while you debate theology. The nobles watched in silence as he lifted Seraphina like she weighed nothing, carried her to the carriage, and set her inside with more care than anyone expected. The children followed, Margaret sobbing against Thomas's shoulder. The door closed. Lucian stood on the steps, surveying the crowd with eyes that promised retribution to anyone stupid enough to interfere. Power doesn't ask permission, he said to the silence. Power simply takes. Remember that. He climbed into the carriage, and they left. Behind them, the aristocracy stood in the snow, wondering what they'd just witnessed, whether it was salvation or something far worse. Blackmere Manor rose from the northern cliffs like a crown of stone and iron, 3 centuries of draven wealth and brutality carved into architecture. Serafina had heard stories about the place. Everyone had. They said the dungeons ran deeper than the mines. They said prisoners went in and only screams came out. They said the Duke tortured rebels personally in the sub-basements, that he enjoyed it, that mercy had died in him years ago along with everything else resembling humanity. Watching him carry her into the manor's great hall, she wondered how much of it was true. He set her in a chair beside the fire without asking if she needed help, then turned to the housekeeper who'd appeared from nowhere. "Prepare the east wing," he said. 4 bedrooms. The children stay together until they decide otherwise. Send for Dr. Rennick immediately. The Duchess is 6 months pregnant and bleeding. I want her examined within the hour. Mrs. Halloway, the housekeeper, nodded crisply. "Yes, Your Grace. Should I prepare separate quarters for—" "1 room," he interrupted. "The lady and her children stay in the east wing. No exceptions." He looked at Serafina then, really looked at her, and she saw something flicker behind the cold calculation. Not warmth, nothing so simple, more like recognition, like he'd seen something in her that matched something in himself. "You're safe here," he said. "No one touches you or your children without going through me first. That's a promise, not a courtesy." "Why?" she asked. "Why help us?" "Because you stood when I told you to stand," he said simply. "Because your children didn't run when I called them. Because you're all still fighting even though the kingdom wants you dead. I respect that. Respect isn't charity. No, it's more valuable." He left before she could respond, his boots echoing against marble floors as he disappeared into the manor's depths. Mrs. Halloway appeared with blankets and hot tea, chattering about preparations while Serafina held her children close and tried to understand what had just happened. Thomas whispered against her shoulder. "Mother, who is he?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. Indeed. Dr. Rennick arrived within the hour, a thin man with nervous hands and the kind of face that apologized for existing. He examined Serafina in the East Wing bedroom while Mrs. Halloway shooed the children into an adjacent room decorated with enough toys to bankrupt a merchant. "The bleeding isn't serious," Rennick said quietly. "Stress-induced, most likely. The child seems healthy, but you need rest. Complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. I have 3 children to care for," Serafina said. "The Duke has staff for that. I don't trust strangers with my children." Rennick looked at her with something approaching pity. "My lady, you're in the Duke's house. You don't have a choice. Then I'll make one." The doctor sighed, packing his instruments. "Your Grace doesn't understand His Grace. He's not like other nobles. When he makes a decision, it doesn't change. If he's decided you're under his protection, you are. Fighting it only makes things harder. I've survived harder." "Have you survived him?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Rennick left without answering it, and Serafina sat in a borrowed bed wearing borrowed clothes in a borrowed room, wondering if she'd escaped the cathedral only to walk into something worse. Lucien didn't visit her for 3 days. The manor functioned around her like a military operation. Servants appeared and disappeared without sound. Meals arrived precisely on time. Her children were fed, clothed, educated by tutors who materialized from nowhere. No one explained anything. No one asked questions. They simply obeyed invisible orders with the efficiency of people who understood consequences. On the 4th day, Thomas came running into her room with Catherine and Margaret behind him, all 3 breathless with excitement. "Mother," Thomas said, "the Duke has a library, a whole room full of books, thousands of them." Serafina sat up carefully. "Did he give you permission to explore?" "He told us the manor was our home now, that we could go anywhere except the North Tower and the lower levels." "Why those places?" Catherine spoke up, eyes wide. "Mrs. Halloway says that's where he works, where he does his investigations. She says people go down there and confess to things they didn't even do just to make him stop asking questions." "That's enough," Serafina said firmly. "Don't repeat gossip." But Margaret, always the brave one despite being the youngest, whispered what they were all thinking. "Mother, is the Duke going to hurt us?" "No," Serafina said with more certainty than she felt. "He won't." "How do you know?" Because if he wanted to hurt us, he already would have. The children accepted this with the brutal logic of youth and ran back to the library. Serafina sat alone in the firelight, wondering if she'd just lied to them. She found him in the observatory just after midnight. The room sat at the manor's highest point, glass walls offering views of the frozen forests and distant mountains. Lucien stood at the window with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, staring at nothing. He didn't turn when she entered. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been resting for 4 days. I needed to walk. The East Wing has corridors. I needed to find you." That made him turn. He looked different at night, less like a duke and more like something carved from the darkness itself. The scar on his face caught the moonlight, making it look fresh. "Why?" he asked. "Because I don't understand you," Serafina said honestly. "You saved us. You've housed us, fed us, protected us. You ask for nothing in return." "Men don't do that. Powerful men especially don't do that." "You're right, they don't. So what do you want from me?" He was quiet for a long moment, measuring her the way he'd measured her on the cathedral steps. Then he spoke, and his voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Weariness, maybe. Or regret. "6 years ago, I had a sister," he said. "Alara. She was kind in ways I never learned to be. Gentle. She believed people were good underneath their fears. She married a merchant from the southern provinces, a good man who made her laugh. They were happy." Serafina waited. Lucien continued, his words careful and precise, like he was testifying under oath. Her husband started asking questions about the Royal Mining Consortium, worker deaths, missing safety inspections, falsified records. He found evidence of systematic negligence, of nobles profiting from conditions that killed dozens every year. He brought it to me because I was the Crown's inquisitor, because he thought I could help. And did you? I investigated. I found everything he claimed was true. I compiled evidence, prepared a report, submitted it directly to the king, and the king ordered me to bury it. Why? Because half the royal court owned shares in those mines. Because exposure meant scandal, financial ruin, possible revolution. Because power protects power, and justice only matters when it's convenient. What happened to your sister? Her husband died in a mining accident 2 weeks after I buried the report. Alara followed 6 months later. They called it grief, said her heart gave out, but I saw her body. I saw the bruises. Someone made sure she stayed quiet. Serafina felt something cold settle in her chest. You think my husband found the same evidence? I know he did. Edmund Vale was thorough, intelligent, and too honest for his own survival. He submitted inquiries that couldn't be ignored, so they silenced him the same way they silenced Alara's husband. And me. Your loose ends, you, your children, the child you're carrying, witnesses to Edmund's questions, potential inheritors to his findings. The aristocracy won't feel safe until you're dead or discredited beyond recovery. So you saved us because of guilt. Lucian's expression hardened. I saved you because I'm tired of watching innocent people die to protect guilty ones. Because I spent 16 years enforcing the Crown's justice, and all I did was sharpen the knives they used on the powerless. Because maybe this time I can protect someone before they're murdered. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They stood in silence, the observatory cold despite the nearby fire. Serafina studied him, this man wrapped in violence and authority, and something else she couldn't name. Shame, perhaps, or fury so old it had frozen into permanence. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you heal. You give birth. Your children grow up safe, and I make sure the people who destroyed your family pay for it. Revenge won't bring them back. No, but it'll prevent the next family from being destroyed the same way. And if I don't want revenge, if I just want to survive, then you survive, Lucian said flatly. Under my protection, in my house, behind my name. The aristocracy wants you dead, Lady Vale. I'm the only thing standing between you and that outcome. Why should I trust you? Because you don't have a choice. The honesty of it cut deeper than lies would have. Serafina looked out at the frozen landscape, at Blackmere's walls rising like teeth against the night, and understood the truth. She'd escaped the cathedral only to become a prisoner of different circumstances. Safer, perhaps, but still trapped. I won't be a decoration, she said finally. I won't sit in your manor playing the grateful widow while you fight battles I can't see. If I'm staying, I'm standing, I'm learning. I'm becoming someone who can protect her children without needing a duke to do it for her. Lucian studied her with something approaching respect. That will be dangerous. More dangerous than childbirth in a world that wants me dead. He almost smiled. Almost. You're braver than I expected. I'm angrier than you expected. This time he did smile, and it transformed his face into something almost human. Good. Anger keeps you alive longer than fear ever could. He walked past her toward the door, paused, looked back. The North Tower and lower levels are still forbidden, he said. Everything else, learn it. Master it. Become the kind of woman who doesn't need protection because she's too dangerous to threaten. And if I can't, then I was wrong about you, and you'll die anyway. But somehow, I don't think I'm wrong. He left her alone in the observatory with moonlight and questions and the first stirring of something that wasn't quite hope, but resembled it from certain angles. Determination, maybe. Or fury. She'd figure it out. The transformation started slowly. Lucien assigned her tutors the way other men assigned servants. Economics first, taught by a former minister who'd been disgraced for exposing corruption and now lived in permanent exile at Blackmere. Political theory from a professor the universities had dismissed for criticizing the crown. Military strategy from Lucien's own captains, men who'd fought in border wars and understood violence as a language. The lessons were brutal. Your husband died because he was naive, the economics tutor said flatly during their second session. He thought evidence mattered. Evidence is only useful if you have the power to enforce consequences. Without power, evidence is just expensive kindling. So how do I get power? Serafina asked. You already have it. You're living under the protection of the kingdom's most feared duke. Now you learn to wield it. The political theory professor was worse. He made her memorize every noble family's financial dependencies, their scandals, their vulnerabilities. Knowledge is the currency of survival, he said. When you know which minister's mistress is blackmailing him, which duchess is embezzling from charities, which lord is hiding bastards in foreign provinces, you own them. Not legally, practically. And if they discover I know, then you'd better have already destroyed them. Half measures get you killed. The military strategy sessions happened in Blackmere's training yard with Lucian watching from the shadows. She didn't learn to fight, not really, but she learned to think like someone who did. Learned about supply lines and weak points and how battles were won through logistics more than courage. Captain Thorne, a scarred veteran with one eye and no patience, summed it up simply. War isn't about honor, my lady. It's about making your enemy hurt worse than you do. Remember that, and you'll outlive the honorable ones. Between lessons, she explored the manor, found Lucien's office with its maps and reports and detailed files on every noble family in the kingdom. Found the armory with enough weapons to start a war. Found the library where her children spent their days reading books that other nobles kept locked away from common eyes. And every night, she found Lucien in the observatory, standing at the window like he was keeping watch over something that couldn't be protected. They talked in the dark about power and survival and the lies people told themselves to sleep at night. Do you ever regret it? She asked one night. The things you did as Inquisitor. Every day, he said without hesitation. But regret doesn't change history. It only poisons the present. Then why keep the files? Why track every noble's secrets like you're still investigating them? Because someday those secrets will matter. Someday someone will need leverage to protect themselves, and I'll have it ready. Someone like me. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity of it made her breath catch. Someone exactly like you. The child came early, screaming into the world during a blizzard that buried Blackmere under 6 feet of snow. Dr. Rennick arrived just in time, his hands shaking from cold and nerves. Mrs. Halloway boiled water and gathered blankets while Serafina's other children waited in the corridor, terrified. Lucien stayed. No one asked him to. He simply appeared in the birthing room and refused to leave, standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his expression carved from ice. The doctor tried to object, stammered about propriety and tradition, but Lucien's look silenced him instantly. Serafina screamed through contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. The pain was absolute, consuming, the kind that made you understand why some women didn't survive. She gripped the bedsheets hard enough to tear them and thought about Edmund, about how he'd held her hand through Thomas's birth and Catherine's and Margaret's, how he'd cried when he first saw each of them. Edmund was dead, and she was bringing a child into a world that wanted them all destroyed, and the only person standing between her and that destruction was a man who specialized in brutality. The thought almost made her laugh. The baby girl arrived just before dawn, tiny and furious and perfect. Rennick cut the cord with shaking hands, cleaned her carefully, wrapped her in blankets that cost more than he'd make in a year. He placed her in Serafina's arms with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred things. "Congratulations, my lady," he whispered. "She's healthy." Serafina looked down at her daughter, this small creature who'd somehow survived everything the kingdom had thrown at them, and felt something break open in her chest. Not joy exactly, more like fierce, protective fury given form. She'd name her Isadora, after her own mother, a survivor's name. When she looked up, Lucian was still there, still watching. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had, something that looked almost like grief. "Thank you," Serafina said quietly. "For what?" "For staying." He nodded once, turned, and left without another word. But she'd seen it. The crack in his armor, just for a moment. The reminder that underneath all the violence and authority lived someone who'd once been human enough to grieve. Winter deepened its grip on Blackmere while Serafina recovered from childbirth. The kingdom's nobles sent no congratulations, no gifts, no acknowledgments of Isadora's birth. The silence was deliberate, calculated. An official snub designed to remind her that she remained disgraced, tainted, beneath acknowledgement. Lucien responded by hosting a dinner. He invited every powerful family within 100 miles, framed it as a celebration of his ward's successful recovery, made attendance essentially mandatory through the careful application of political pressure and thinly veiled threats. Serafina watched the preparations with growing dread. "This is a mistake," she told him the night before. "They'll use it against us." "They're already using everything against us," Lucian said calmly. "At least this way they have to do it to our faces." "I'm not ready." "You were ready the moment you stood in the snow instead of dying in it. Everything since has just been confirmation." The dinner was torture disguised as society. 40 nobles packed into Blackmere's dining hall, dripping with jewels and false smiles and eyes that measured weakness like butchers evaluating meat. Serafina wore silver silk that made her look like winter itself, held Isadora against her chest, and walked into the hall with her head high and her children following behind her. The room fell silent. Then Lucien appeared at her side, offered his arm, and escorted her to the head of the table like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. The nobles watched with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to carefully hidden fury. "Duchess Serafina," Lucian said clearly, addressing the room. "Mother to my wards, survivor of injustice, and honored guest of House Draven." "She's not a duchess," someone muttered from the back. "Lord Ashford, probably." He'd been friends with the ministers who'd seized her estate. Lucien's head turned slowly, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Would you like to repeat that?" Silence. "I thought not," Lucien continued. "As I was saying, Lady Serafina and her children are under my direct protection. Anyone who insults them insults House Draven. Anyone who threatens them threatens me personally. I trust everyone understands the implications. The nobles understood. They always understood. Understanding wasn't the same as acceptance, but it was enough to keep them civilized through 7 courses of dinner and forced conversation. Serafina sat beside Lucien, fed Isadora when necessary, answered questions with careful precision, and watched the aristocracy watch her, judging, calculating, planning ways to destroy her the moment Lucian's attention wandered. Lady Blackwood, a duchess who controlled half the southern trade routes, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, dear, how are you managing without your dear husband? It must be so difficult, raising children alone." "I'm not alone," Serafina said quietly. "No, of course not. You have the Duke's charity. I have the Duke's protection." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Charity can be withdrawn. Protection lasts as long as I'm valuable." The table went quiet. Lucien didn't react, didn't even look at her, but she felt his attention sharpen like a blade being drawn. Lady Blackwood's smile tightened. "And what makes you valuable, child?" Serafina met her eyes directly. "I survived. In a kingdom that wanted me dead, that destroyed my family, that stole my home and tried to murder my children, I survived. That's valuable to anyone who understands how much this kingdom hates survivors." The honesty of it cut through the room like winter wind. Several nobles looked away. Others stared with new calculation. Lady Blackwood's smile vanished entirely. Lucian spoke into the silence, his voice carrying absolute authority. My ward speaks truth. This kingdom devours its vulnerable and calls it justice. I'm tired of watching it happen. Anyone in this room who participated in the persecution of Lady Seraphina would be wise to remember that I have very long memory and very little patience for predators who hunt the weak. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The dinner continued in strained civility, but the dynamic had shifted. The nobles weren't just afraid of Lucian anymore. They were starting to fear what Seraphina might become with his support behind her. After the guests departed, Lucian found her in the east wing sitting by the fire with Isadora asleep in her arms. You took a risk tonight, he said. So did you. Mine was calculated. Yours was reckless. Good. Maybe I'm learning from you. He sat across from her, studying her face in the firelight. You made enemies tonight, powerful ones. I already had enemies. Now they know I'm not afraid of them. Fear and survival aren't the same thing. Neither are submission and safety. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuine and almost warm. You're going to be dangerous, aren't you? I'm going to be whatever keeps my children alive. That's what I thought. He stood, moved toward the door, paused. The observatory, he said. Tonight. There's something you need to see. She found him surrounded by documents. The observatory's table was covered in papers, ledgers, correspondence, maps marked with red ink. Lucian stood over it all like a general planning war, his coat discarded, sleeves rolled up, the scar on his face sharp in the lamplight. What is this? Seraphina asked. Proof, he said simply. Everything your husband found about the mining consortium. Everything my sister's husband discovered. 6 years of investigation compiled into evidence that would destroy half the royal court. Where did you get this? I never stopped investigating. Even after the king ordered me to bury it, I kept collecting evidence. Quietly. Carefully. Building a case no one knew existed. Why? Because someday it would matter. Someday someone would need it. And now you do. Seraphina moved closer, examining the documents. Financial records showing massive profits alongside worker death reports. Correspondence between nobles discussing how to suppress investigations. Bribes paid to ministers, judges, church officials. Evidence of systematic murder disguised as industrial accident. This would end them, she whispered. Yes. So why haven't you used it? Lucian looked at her with something close to pain. Because releasing it means war, not political maneuvering or scandal, actual war. The nobles implicated would rather burn the kingdom than face justice. Thousands would die in the chaos. And if we do nothing, then the killing continues. Different victims, same system. Seraphina studied the papers, her hands shaking slightly. So we're choosing between immediate war and slow murder. We're choosing between justice and survival. They're rarely the same thing. What do you recommend? I recommend you understand what you're asking for. This evidence makes you the most dangerous person in the kingdom. If the aristocracy discovers you have it, they won't just kill you. They'll make you watch your children die first. Then we protect it. We wait. We choose our moment. And when that moment comes, then we burn their world down and build something better from the ashes. Lucian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Who are you? I'm a mother protecting her children. That's all. That's enough. She left him standing in the observatory, surrounded by evidence and possibilities and the ghost of his sister's memory. Walked back to her children, sleeping in rooms that cost more than her previous life, held Isadora against her chest, and made a promise to herself. She would learn. She would master every weapon available. She would become the kind of threat that made powerful people afraid. And then she would make them pay for everything they'd taken from her family. 6 months passed like drawn blades. Seraphina's education intensified. Mornings studying economics and political theory. Afternoons practicing rhetoric and negotiation. Evenings in Lucien's office learning to read people the way he did, to spot lies and calculate leverage and understand power as a practical tool rather than abstract concept. Her children thrived. Thomas discovered a love for strategy that rivaled Lucian's own. Catherine developed a gift for languages and codes. Margaret, impossibly, befriended half the manor staff and learned secrets from servants that nobles would kill to know. And Isadora grew, bright and fierce, her laughter echoing through corridors that had known too much silence for too long. The nobles watched, waited, planned. Then the summons arrived, the royal seal, delivered by courier at dawn. A command, not an invitation. Lady Seraphina Vale and Duke Lucian Draven were to appear before the King's Council in 2 weeks to answer questions regarding the Duke's custody of the late Lord Vale's children and the propriety of their living arrangements. Seraphina read it twice, her blood turning cold. "It's a trap," she said. Lucien stood by the window, holding his own copy of the summons. "Of course it's a trap. The council wants to separate you from the children, declare you unfit, place them under state guardianship. Which means they'll disappear into noble families who'll use them as leverage against anything you might reveal. Hostages disguised as wards. Can we refuse?" "No. Refusing a royal summons means treason charges. They'd have legal justification to seize everything. Then we comply, and walk directly into their trap." Seraphina looked at her children playing in the gardens below, oblivious to the danger circling them. "No, we don't walk into their trap. We spring it on our terms." Lucian turned from the window. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give them what they want, a hearing about propriety and fitness, but we don't defend ourselves. We put them on trial instead." "How?" She moved to his desk, pulled out the compiled evidence they'd been protecting for 6 months. "With this. We answer their questions about my fitness by asking why they're so interested in destroying Edmund Vale's family. We submit this as evidence of their motivation. Force them to defend themselves publicly. That's suicide. They'll never allow it into evidence. They will if we frame it correctly. If we present it as documentation of the threats my family has faced, the systematic persecution, the clear evidence of why we needed the Duke's protection. They won't be able to dismiss it without admitting they have something to hide." Lucian stared at the documents, then at her, his expression unreadable. "You understand what you're risking. If this fails, we lose everything. If we do nothing, we've already lost." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, sharp and dangerous. "You've learned well. I had a good teacher. Then let's show the kingdom exactly how good." Yeah. The council hearing took place in the royal palace's grand chamber, beneath vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows depicting the kingdom's glorious history. 60 nobles packed the gallery. The King's Council sat on an elevated platform, 7 ministers in robes of state looking down at Seraphina and Lucian like judges presiding over execution. Lord Chancellor Wexford, a man whose family fortune came entirely from mining investments, spoke first. "Lady Seraphina Vale, you stand before this council to answer questions regarding your current living situation and the welfare of your children. Do you understand the proceedings?" "I understand," Seraphina said clearly. "The Duke of Blackmere has taken you and your children into his household under circumstances this council finds questionable. You are an unmarried woman living in close quarters with an unmarried man. Your late husband died under suspicious circumstances. Your newborn daughter's paternity remains unconfirmed. These factors raise serious concerns about moral fitness." "My late husband died in a mining accident," Seraphina said. "An accident caused by negligent safety practices that killed 17 other men that same month. The council is aware of the tragic incident. Is it aware that those 17 men died because safety inspections were falsified? Because equipment was never replaced? Because the mining consortium prioritized profit over human life?" Wexford's expression tightened. "That is a serious accusation. It's a documented fact." Lucian stood, pulled documents from his case, and submitted them to the council clerk. Evidence compiled by Lord Edmund Vale before his death. Safety inspection reports showing systematic falsification. Financial records indicating knowledge of dangerous conditions among consortium leadership. Correspondence proving that complaints were suppressed. The chamber erupted. Nobles shouting, ministers demanding order. The Chancellor's face turning purple with fury. "This hearing concerns Lady Seraphina's fitness as a mother," Wexford roared. "Not baseless accusations against—" "Baseless," Seraphina interrupted. "The records show that every noble family represented on this council holds financial interest in the Royal Mining Consortium. Every single one. You're not investigating my fitness. You're protecting your investments." The gallery exploded into chaos. Lucian remained standing, calm and terrible, while Seraphina felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment. Either the evidence would speak for itself, or they'd be destroyed. "Order!" Wexford shouted. "Order in this chamber!" Slowly, the noise subsided. The Chancellor looked at Serafina with pure hatred. "You dare accuse this council of corruption?" "I'm stating facts. My husband discovered evidence of criminal negligence. He submitted formal complaints. 3 weeks later, he was dead. I became the target of coordinated persecution designed to silence my family permanently. The Duke of Blackmere offered protection because no one else would. That's not scandal. That's survival." Minister Aldrich, younger than the others and clearly nervous, spoke up. "If what you claim is true, why didn't you bring this evidence forward earlier?" "Because earlier I was bleeding in the snow outside a cathedral while nobles watched and did nothing," Serafina said flatly. "Because I was fighting to keep my children alive. Because I had to become strong enough to stand here and speak without being dismissed as a hysterical widow." The silence that followed was absolute. Lucien placed another stack of documents on the clerk's desk. Additional evidence compiled over 6 years. Similar deaths in other mines. Similar patterns of suppression. Similar persecution of families who asked questions. This isn't about one incident. It's about systematic murder protected by people in this room. Wexford stood, shaking with rage. "This hearing is over. The council will not tolerate. The council will hear all evidence," a new voice said. Everyone turned. The king had entered the chamber, moving with the slow precision of advanced age and absolute authority. He lowered himself into his throne while ministers scrambled to bow and nobles dropped to their knees. Serafina and Lucien stood their ground. "Your Majesty," Wexford stammered, "this is highly irregular." "Continue," the king said to Serafina. "I'm interested in what else you've discovered." She told him everything. The falsified inspections, the suppressed investigations, the coordinated persecution, Edmund's murder, the attacks on her children. 6 years of evidence compiled by her husband and Lucien both, showing systematic corruption protected by the very nobles claiming to investigate her fitness. The king listened without expression. When she finished, he looked at the council with eyes that had watched kingdoms rise and fall. "It seems to me," he said quietly, "that Lady Serafina has demonstrated remarkable fitness under impossible circumstances. She's survived attacks that would have destroyed weaker people. She's protected her children against persecution orchestrated by this chamber's own members. And she's had the courage to speak truth to power when silence would have been safer." He stood slowly, every eye in the chamber fixed on him. "The council will conduct a full investigation into the Royal Mining Consortium. Lord Chancellor Wexford and Minister Aldrich will recuse themselves due to financial conflict. Lady Serafina and her children will remain under Duke Draven's protection until such time as she chooses otherwise. This hearing is concluded." He left without another word, and the chamber descended into barely controlled chaos. They didn't speak during the carriage ride back to Blackmere. Serafina held Isidora and stared out the window while Lucien sat across from her, radiating dangerous satisfaction. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd actually won. But victory came with cost. "You made enemies today," Lucien said finally. "Powerful ones who won't forgive or forget." "I know. They'll come for you. Quietly, carefully, but they'll come. I know that too." "Good. As long as you understand." She looked at him then, this man who'd saved her for reasons he still didn't fully explain, who'd armed her with knowledge and evidence and the will to fight back. "Why did you really help me?" she asked. The truth this time. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the frozen landscape roll past. "Because my sister deserved justice and never received it," he said finally. "Because I spent years enforcing a corrupt system and told myself I was serving justice when really I was just sharpening knives for monsters. Because you reminded me that survival isn't the same as surrender." He met her eyes. "Because you were strong enough to stand when I told you to stand, and I wanted to see what you'd become if someone gave you the weapons to fight back. And now you know. Now I know." He smiled, sharp and dangerous. "You're terrifying, Lady Vale. Exactly as you should be." The carriage rolled through Blackmere's gates as night fell across the northern territories. Serafina held her daughter close and thought about the war they'd just started, the enemies they'd made, the justice they might finally achieve. Her children were safe. For now. But the nobles who'd destroyed her family were planning their revenge, gathering in shadows, sharpening their own knives. And somewhere in the palace, in rooms where decisions were made behind closed doors, someone was already planning how to make Serafina Vale disappear permanently. She just didn't know it yet. The assassination attempt came 3 weeks after the council hearing. Serafina woke to silence, which was wrong. Black Mirror always had sound. Servants moving through corridors, guards changing shifts, the wind howling against stone walls. But tonight the manor held its breath like something dead, and her instincts screamed danger before her mind caught up. She rolled from bed, grabbed the knife Lucien had insisted she keep beneath her pillow, and moved toward the children's rooms. The hallway stretched empty and dark, too dark. Someone had extinguished the lamps. Her bare feet made no sound against cold stone as she pushed open Thomas's door. Empty bed. Catherine's room, the same. Margaret's nursery, vacant. Ice flooded her veins. She ran toward Isidora's cradle, already knowing what she'd find. Gone. All of them. Gone. The scream building in her throat died when cold steel pressed against her neck from behind. "Don't move," a voice whispered. "Don't breathe. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Where are my children? Safe. For now. Depends on whether you cooperate." The blade pressed harder, drawing blood. Serafina forced herself still, calculating. The assassin was professional, positioned perfectly, no wasted movement. Fighting would get her killed before she took 2 steps. "What do you want?" "You know what we want. The evidence. Everything your husband compiled. Everything the Duke's been protecting. Hand it over, and your children live through the night. And if I refuse, then we start with the baby." Rage flooded through her, white-hot and absolute, but she buried it beneath ice. Emotion got you killed. Lucien had taught her that. Think, calculate, survive. "The evidence isn't here," she said quietly. "Lucien keeps it locked in the North Tower. I don't have access." "Liar. I'm a widow he's protecting, not his partner. He doesn't trust me with his secrets." The blade wavered slightly. "Doubt. Good." She pressed the advantage. "But I can get you inside the tower. I know the guards' rotations. I know which doors aren't watched. Take me with you, and I'll show you where he hides everything. Why would you betray him? Because he's not worth my children's lives. Nothing is." The assassin was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Serafina felt sweat sliding down her spine despite the cold. This had to work. It had to. "Move," the voice said finally, slowly. "Any sudden moves, and I open your throat." They walked through corridors Serafina knew by heart, the blade never leaving her neck. She counted steps, measured distances, waited for opportunity. The assassin was good but not perfect. He was thinking about the evidence, about completing his mission, about the reward waiting when this was finished. He wasn't thinking about what desperation made people capable of. They reached the North Tower entrance. The guard posted there lay in a spreading pool of blood, throat cut ear to ear. Serafina stepped over the body without looking down, pushed open the door with shaking hands. "The stairs," she whispered. 3rd floor. The locked chamber at the end of the corridor. They climbed in darkness. Serafina's mind raced. The North Tower was forbidden for reasons beyond security. Lucien conducted his interrogations here, his investigations, his private work that left men broken and confessing to crimes they hadn't committed. She'd never been inside, but she'd heard the screams. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The corridor stretched ahead, doors on either side, all closed, all silent. "Which one?" the assassin demanded. "The end. The iron door." They moved forward. Serafina felt the blade dig deeper into her neck, felt warm blood sliding toward her collarbone. 10 more steps. 5. 3. The iron door stood closed and massive, no lock visible, no handle, just solid metal and whatever horrors waited behind it. "Open it," the assassin said. "I told you, I don't have access." "Then we have a problem." Serafina smiled despite the blade, despite the blood, despite everything. "No. You do." She drove her elbow backward into the assassin's ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed, twisted away from the blade and screamed. "Lucien!" The iron door exploded outward. Lucien moved like violence given form. No wasted motion, pure lethal efficiency. He caught the assassin's knife hand, twisted until bones cracked, drove his other hand into the man's throat hard enough to crush cartilage. The assassin went down choking, and Lucien was on him instantly, knee against chest, hands around throat. "Where are the children?" he said quietly. The assassin gurgled, eyes bulging. Lucien squeezed harder. "I asked a question." Serafina grabbed his shoulder. "Stop. He can't answer if he can't breathe." Lucien released pressure slightly, just enough for the man to gasp air. The assassin's face had gone purple, veins standing out like cables beneath skin. "The East Wing," he choked out. "Locked in the storage room. We didn't hurt them. Orders were to use them as leverage, nothing more." "How many others?" "4. All dead now." "Your guards killed them. Who sent you?" The assassin's eyes flickered with something between fear and resignation. "You know who. The consortium. The nobles you humiliated. They're not going to stop. They'll keep coming until you're all dead and the evidence is buried." Lucien looked at Serafina. "Get the children. Lock them in my chambers. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 6 years ago." She ran, found her children huddled together in the storage room, terrified but unharmed, and gathered them close. Thomas tried to be brave. Catherine sobbed against her shoulder. Margaret clung to her neck while Isadora screamed with infant fury. Serafina carried them through corridors slick with blood, past bodies of assassins killed by Blackmere guards, into Lucie Gisien's private chambers. She locked the door, barricaded it with furniture, and held her children while they shook. "It's over," she whispered. "We're safe now." But she could still hear screaming from the North Tower, and she knew it wasn't over at all. It was just beginning. Lucien didn't emerge until dawn. When he did, his clothes were soaked in blood that wasn't his knuckles raw, his eyes carrying the kind of emptiness that came from doing necessary things that destroyed whatever humanity remained. He looked at Serafina and her children barricaded in his chambers, and something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe? Or regret? "The threat is contained," he said quietly. "For now." "How many?" Serafina asked. "Enough. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." He moved to his desk, pulled out documents, began writing with mechanical precision. Letters, she realized. Summons. Orders. The kind of correspondence that started wars or ended them. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Calling in debts. The consortium wants war, they'll get it, but not on their terms. Lucien, we barely survived tonight. If they send more, they will send more. They'll keep sending them until we're dead or they are. That's how power works. You can't negotiate with people who've decided you're too dangerous to live. Then what's the solution? We become more dangerous than they can afford to ignore." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death and caused more. "I'm going to destroy them. Every noble family involved in the consortium, every minister who covered up the murders, every aristocrat who profited from those mines while workers died underground. I'm going to ruin them so completely that the next generation of power-hungry bastards thinks twice before killing innocents for profit. That's not justice. That's revenge. Justice is what people call revenge when it's sanctioned by authority. I don't have time for the distinction, and if innocent people get caught in the crossfire..." Lucien's expression hardened. "There are no innocent people in the aristocracy. Only varying degrees of guilt and varying levels of proof. I've spent 16 years learning the difference." Serafina stood, still holding Isadora, and moved closer to him. "You're talking about becoming the monster they already think you are. I've always been the monster. I just pretended otherwise to sleep at night. Turns out I sleep fine anyway." She studied his face, this man who'd saved her and armed her and taught her survival through violence, and saw the truth beneath his words. He wasn't becoming a monster. He was accepting what he'd always been, what the kingdom had shaped him into through years of service to corruption. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like recognition. "I want to help," she said. "No, I'm not asking permission. They tried to kill my children. They came into your home and threatened everything we've built. You don't get to fight this alone." "Serafina, what I'm planning, I don't care. I don't care if it's revenge or justice or pure destruction. They deserve whatever happens to them. And when it's over, when the bodies are buried and the evidence is released and the kingdom tears itself apart in the aftermath. What then? Then we rebuild. We create something better from the ruins." Lucien stared at her like she was speaking a language he'd forgotten existed. Hope, maybe. Or delusion? Hard to tell the difference when you'd lived in darkness as long as he had. "You're not ready for this," he said finally. "I survived an assassination attempt using my children as hostages. I think I'm ready for anything. Surviving and winning aren't the same thing." "Then teach me to win." He was quiet for a long moment, measuring her the way he'd measured her on the cathedral steps months ago, looking for weakness, for breaking points, for reasons to protect her from herself. He found none. "Fine," he said, "but you follow my orders exactly. No improvisation, no heroics, no trying to save people who don't deserve saving. Can you do that?" "Yes. Swear it. I swear." He nodded once, turned back to his letters, and Serafina understood she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was no longer a widow under protection. She was a weapon being sharpened for war. Her children slept in Lucian's bed while she stood beside him at his desk, learning the names of everyone who would die before this was finished. It was a long list. The first strike came 3 days later. Lord Pemberton owned 17% of the mining consortium and had personally signed off on safety inspection falsifications that killed 43 workers over 2 years. He also sat on the Royal Treasury Board and controlled shipping contracts worth millions. Lucien destroyed him in 48 hours. Evidence of embezzlement delivered to the king's private investigators. Shipping manifests showing smuggled goods. Love letters to his mistress proving he'd funneled treasury funds into her accounts. By week's end, Pemberton was arrested, his assets seized, his family name ruined. He hanged himself in his cell before trial. Lucian barely reacted when the news arrived. "One down," he said calmly. 37 to go. Serafina watched from across his desk, where she'd spent 3 days learning to read financial records like evidence of crime. "You feel nothing. I feel efficiency." Pemberton was corrupt, murderous, and weak. He solved our problem by killing himself. That's ideal. He had a family. So did the 43 workers who died in his mines. Their families weren't given the luxury of choosing their fate. The logic was brutal and absolute, and Serafina couldn't argue with it. She looked down at the next file instead, the next target, the next monster wearing noble clothes. "Minister Blackwood," she read aloud, "Chief Administrator of Mining Safety Regulations, accepted bribes totaling over 200,000 in exchange for ignoring violations." What else? She flipped through pages. 3 mistresses, 2 illegitimate children he's never acknowledged. Gambling debts he's been covering with embezzled funds from the safety regulation budget. Vulnerabilities. The mistresses don't know about each other. The illegitimate children could be used as leverage if we threaten exposure. The gambling debts make him desperate. Good. What's your recommendation? Serafina hesitated. This was a test. Lucien tested everything, pushing her to think like he did, cold and calculating. "We expose the mistresses to each other," she said slowly. "Create chaos in his personal life. Then we threaten to reveal the illegitimate children unless he provides testimony against the other consortium members. When he's served his purpose, we release the embezzlement evidence anyway and let the Crown handle execution." Lucian smiled. Why release the embezzlement evidence if he's already testified? Because mercy makes people complacent. We need the aristocracy to understand that cooperation doesn't guarantee survival. It just changes how you die. The smile widened. "You're learning. I have a good teacher. You have a ruthless teacher. There's a difference. Is there?" He looked at her across the desk, and something shifted in his expression. Something almost like pride. "Not yet. But you're getting there." The campaign of destruction continued through autumn like a slow plague. Lord Ashford caught accepting bribes from mining equipment manufacturers who sold defective machinery that killed workers. Ruined. Duchess Harrington, exposed for using consortium profits to fund a private estate while claiming poverty to avoid taxes. Destroyed. Minister Vance, arrested for falsifying death certificates to hide worker casualties, executed by royal decree. One by one, the aristocracy fell. Some fought back, hiring assassins and spreading counter-accusations. Some fled the kingdom entirely. Some died by their own hand rather than face public trial. Lucian tracked each outcome with clinical precision, updating files and moving to the next target without pause. Serafina worked beside him, learning to weaponize information the way he did, finding vulnerabilities in people who thought themselves untouchable. At night, she held her children and tried to remember what innocence felt like. Thomas asked questions about the nobles being arrested, trying to understand justice and revenge, and where the line existed between them. Serafina didn't have answers that satisfied either of them. Catherine stopped speaking for a week after watching guards drag a minister from his estate while his children screamed. She started talking again eventually, but something had changed in her eyes. Knowledge, maybe, or the loss of whatever illusions children needed to feel safe. Margaret collected newspaper clippings about the trials like other children collected dolls, arranging them on her bedroom floor in patterns that formed maps of destruction. She was 6 years old and already understood that power came from knowing which pieces to move and when. Isadora remained oblivious, growing healthy and strong in Blackmere's nursery while the kingdom burned beyond its walls. Sometimes Serafina wondered if protecting them meant shielding them from truth, or teaching them to survive it. Lucien had opinions. "They need to understand how the world works," he said one night while reviewing evidence in the observatory. "Sheltering them only makes them vulnerable to people who'll exploit their ignorance. They're children. So were you once. Did innocence protect you when the nobles destroyed your family?" "No." "Exactly. The world is brutal. Either we prepare them for it, or we watch them get destroyed by it. There's no third option." Serafina looked out at Blackmere's grounds, at the walls and guards and fortress mentality that defined their lives now. Maybe there should be. Maybe. But there isn't. The confrontation with Lady Blackwood happened at the Winter Gala, because of course it did. The aristocracy gathered annually to pretend civilization still existed, to dance and drink and make alliances while ignoring the bodies buried beneath their wealth. Attendance was mandatory for anyone with a title, which meant Serafina and Lucien had no choice but to participate in the charade. She wore black silk that made her look like mourning personified. Lucien wore his usual charcoal with weapons hidden beneath expensive tailoring. They entered the ballroom like predators walking among prey, and the crowd parted instinctively. Lady Blackwood stood near the champagne fountain surrounded by allies, her smile sharp as knives. She'd survived their campaign so far through careful maneuvering and powerful connections, but her consortium shares made her a target. Just a matter of time. "Lady Serafina," she called out loud enough for half the room to hear. How generous of the Duke to bring his charity case to such a refined gathering. The ballroom went quiet. Lucien's hand moved toward his concealed blade, but Serafina touched his arm gently. "Mine," she said quietly. She walked toward Lady Blackwood with her head high and her smile pleasant. The crowd watched like spectators at an execution, which wasn't far from truth. "Lady Blackwood," Serafina said warmly, "I'm so glad you're here. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down later." The Duchess's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me. The Mining Consortium. I've been reviewing your financial records. Fascinating reading. Did you know you've personally profited over $600,000 from operations that killed 92 workers in the past 3 years alone?" The ballroom erupted in whispers. Lady Blackwood's face went white. "How dare you make such accusations?" "I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts. Would you like me to continue?" "I have the ledgers memorized." "You have nothing. You're a desperate widow clinging to relevance through the Duke's protection." Serafina moved closer, voice dropping low enough that only Blackwood could hear. "I have everything. Every bribe you've accepted, every safety violation you've ignored, every worker's family you've destroyed. And tomorrow morning, it's all being delivered to the King's private investigators, along with a formal request for immediate prosecution. That's treason. You can't... Watch me." She turned to walk away, but Blackwood grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You think you're safe behind the Duke's shadow. You're not. You're a whore playing at nobility, and when he tires of you, we'll make sure you die screaming." Serafina looked down at the hand gripping her arm, then up at Blackwood's face, twisted with rage and fear. Then she smiled. "If you want to threaten me, at least have the courage to do it with your own knife instead of your words." She twisted free and walked back to Lucien while the ballroom watched in stunned silence. He took her arm without comment, but she felt tension radiating from him like heat. "Well played," he said quietly. "She threatened my children." "I know. I heard. And she'll be dead by morning." Serafina should have been horrified, should have protested, argued, demanded he show mercy. Instead, she felt savage satisfaction settle into her bones like warmth. "Good," she said. They left the gala early. By dawn, Lady Blackwood was found dead in her chambers, cause of death listed as heart failure, though everyone knew better. Her consortium shares were seized by the crown. Her family fled to foreign provinces. No one asked questions. No one wanted the answers. The proposal came without warning. Serafina sat in the observatory reviewing evidence for their next target when Lucien appeared behind her, silent as always. She'd learned to feel his presence now, the way you felt shifts in temperature. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "Us." She turned, surprised. There was no US beyond their partnership in destruction, their alliance against the aristocracy. They worked together, planned together, occasionally shared moments of brutal honesty, but nothing more. Lucien moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The kingdom thinks you're my mistress. My political opponents use it against us. The church questions the morality of our arrangement. It weakens our position. So what are you suggesting?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air like smoke. Serafina stared at him, trying to understand if he was serious or testing her somehow. "You want to marry me," she said slowly. "I want to eliminate a vulnerability. Marriage legitimizes your position, makes you untouchable by social convention, consolidates our power into a single unit. It's strategically sound. How romantic. I'm not offering romance, I'm offering survival. We're already surviving, barely, and only because I'm willing to kill anyone who threatens you. Marriage changes the equation. It makes you my equal legally, gives you independent authority, protects your children through bloodline rather than charity. They're not your children." The words came out sharper than intended. Lucien turned from the window, and his expression carried something she couldn't read. "No," he said quietly, "but I've protected them with my life for months. I've taught them, sheltered them, kept them alive when the kingdom wanted them dead. What is fatherhood if not that?" Serafina felt something crack in her chest. "Edmund," she whispered, "is dead. I'm not trying to replace him. But I can give his children a future he can't. Through my name, my resources, my willingness to destroy anyone who threatens them. And what do you get from this arrangement?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is, I don't know. I've spent my entire life serving power, enforcing corruption, burying innocents to protect the guilty. You and your children are the first thing I've fought for that feels like redemption instead of damnation. That's not love. No, it's something more practical, more honest." Serafina looked at this man who'd saved her, armed her, turned her into someone capable of surviving in a world built to destroy people like her. She thought about Thomas learning strategy, Catherine learning languages, Margaret learning leverage, Isadora growing up protected by walls and weapons, and the most dangerous man in the kingdom. She thought about Edmund and the life they'd planned before power devoured it. She thought about survival and whether it was worth the price. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "this is real. Not a performance, not political theater. I won't be your decorative wife smiling at galas while you make the actual decisions. I wouldn't expect you to be. I want equal authority in this war we're fighting, equal say in every target, every strategy, every decision. Done. I want my children raised to understand power without worshiping it, to know how to survive without becoming monsters." Lucien smiled slightly. That might be the hardest promise to keep. Try anyway. He moved closer, stopping just within reach. "If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be Duchess Draven, bound to House Blackmere, legally responsible for everything I've done and everything I'll do. That includes the bodies buried in forgotten graves and the ones we haven't killed yet. I understand. Do you? Because once you take my name, my enemies become your enemies. My sins become your sins. My darkness becomes yours to carry." Serafina looked up at him, this scarred killer wrapped in nobility, and felt the weight of the choice before her. She could refuse. Stay Lady Vale, remain protected but separate, keep her children insulated from the worst of what they were building. Or she could accept, become Draven, step fully into the war and all its consequences. She thought about the nobles who'd destroyed Edmund, about the workers who died in mines while aristocrats profited, about the kingdom that devoured its vulnerable and called it justice. She thought about power and whether there was any other way to survive it except by seizing it yourself. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." Lucien exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "When?" "Soon. Before the consortium realizes what we're planning, before they have time to mount a proper defense. Tomorrow, then." She blinked. "Tomorrow. The Royal Chapel. Private ceremony, limited witnesses. By the time the aristocracy knows what happened, it'll be too late to prevent it. You've already planned this. I plan everything. You know that." Serafina laughed despite herself. "Despite everything. You're impossible. I'm efficient. There's a difference." He took her hand and she felt calluses from years of violence against her skin. Not gentle, not romantic, but honest in ways softness could never be. "I won't be a good husband," he said quietly. "I don't know how, but I'll protect you and your children with everything I have. That's the only promise I can make. It's enough." "Is it?" She squeezed his hand. "It has to be." Odd. The wedding took place at dawn in Blackmere's private chapel with exactly 6 witnesses. Mrs. Halloway wept quietly in the front row, while Captain Thorne stood guard at the door. Dr. Rennick attended because Lucian insisted on medical presence in case Serafina fainted from stress. The priest stammered through vows he clearly didn't believe in, blessing a union everyone knew was built on survival rather than love. Serafina wore silver that made her look like winter itself. Lucienne wore black. Her children stood beside her, confused but quiet, understanding something important was happening even if they didn't fully grasp what. The vows were traditional, except for one addition Lucian insisted on. "I swear to protect you and yours," he said clearly, "until death claims me or you release me from service. No force on earth will harm you while I draw breath. This is my oath." Serafina repeated the same words, feeling their weight settle over her like armor. Then the priest pronounced them married, and Lucienne kissed her. Not softly, not ceremonially. It was the kiss of a man claiming something precious and dangerous at the same time, possession colliding with respect, while Serafina felt the full force of what she'd just agreed to. When they pulled apart, her children were staring with wide eyes. "Does this mean he's our father now?" Margaret whispered. Serafina knelt beside them. "It means he's family. It means we're all protecting each other." Thomas looked up at Lucian with the kind of assessment that belonged on someone far older. "Will you keep us safe?" Lucian met the boy's eyes without softening his expression. "I'll keep you alive, but I'll also teach you to keep yourselves safe. One day I won't be here, and you'll need to survive without me." The honesty of it silenced the chapel. Then Thomas nodded slowly, accepting the terms. "Good," he said. News of the marriage spread through the kingdom like wildfire. The Duke of Blackmere had married his scandalous ward. The disgraced widow was now Duchess Draven. The children everyone assumed were bastards now carried one of the most powerful names in the realm. The aristocracy responded with coordinated fury. Petitions demanding annulment, church investigations into the marriage's legitimacy, formal challenges to the Draven succession. The consortium members who'd survived the purge so far gathered allies and resources, preparing for war they'd been avoiding. Lucienne welcomed it with cold satisfaction. "Let them come," he said while reviewing attack plans in his office. "We're done playing defensive." "What changed?" Serafina asked from her new position beside him at the desk. "You're my wife now. That means I don't have to pretend restraint anymore. You were never restrained. I was strategic. Now I can be honest." He pulled out a final list, this one shorter than the others but far more dangerous. The consortium's inner circle. The nobles who'd orchestrated everything, who'd ordered Edmund's death and covered up the mining murders and built their fortunes on systematic slaughter. Lord Chancellor Wexford at the top. "These are the architects," Lucian said quietly. "The others were just accomplices. These men designed the system that killed your husband and my sister. They're the reason hundreds of workers died while safety reports got falsified. You've been protecting them, saving them for last. The minor players had to fall first to isolate these targets, remove their support structure, leave them exposed. And now we finish it." Serafina studied the names, committing them to memory. "How?" Lucian smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression she'd ever seen on him. "We're going to release everything. Every piece of evidence we've compiled. Every murder, every bribe, every falsified document. We're going to bury them so completely that even the crown can't protect them. That will destabilize the entire government. Yes, people will die in the chaos. People are already dying. At least this way, the right ones suffer for it." Serafina looked at her husband, this man she'd married for survival and strategy, and understood they'd crossed the final line. Everything before had been preparation. This was the war itself, and it would consume them both. "When?" she asked. "1 week. We give the evidence to the king privately first, force him to choose between justice and protecting his corrupt court. Then we release it publicly, regardless of his decision. And if he tries to stop us, then we burn the kingdom down and rebuild from ash. She should have been terrified. Should have argued for caution, for incremental change, for solutions that didn't risk civil war. Instead, she felt clarity settle through her like winter light. "Then let's burn it," she said. The king received them in his private chambers 3 days before the planned release. Lucien and Serafina entered the palace like diplomats walking into enemy territory, which wasn't far from truth. Royal guards lined every corridor, hands resting on sword hilts, eyes tracking their movement with the kind of attention reserved for threats rather than guests. The message was clear. They were tolerated, not welcomed. King Aldrich sat behind an oak desk that had witnessed 3 centuries of political maneuvering and probable murder. He was 72 years old, his face carved with age and decision, his eyes still sharp despite the body's decay. Power had kept him breathing long after nature should have claimed him. "Duke Draven," he said without preamble. "Duchess, I understand you have information requiring my immediate attention." Lucien placed the compiled evidence on the desk. Documents stacked 6 inches high, financial records, death certificates, correspondence, testimony from survivors. 6 years of investigation compressed into proof that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. "Your Majesty, this evidence demonstrates systematic corruption within the Royal Mining Consortium, falsified safety inspections, deliberate negligence resulting in hundreds of worker deaths, bribes paid to ministers, judges, and administrative officials to suppress investigations. It implicates 43 noble families and 17 members of your court. The king didn't touch the documents. He simply looked at them like they were diseased. And you bring this to me because I'm giving you the opportunity to address it privately," Lucien said. "To conduct trials, seize assets, restore some measure of justice before the evidence becomes public knowledge. How generous." "It's practical. Public release will destabilize your government, possibly trigger civil unrest. Private prosecution maintains order while delivering consequences." King Aldrich leaned back in his chair, studying them both with eyes that had evaluated thousands of people trying to manipulate him over 7 decades. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You're not here to give me options. You're here to force my hand. You've compiled evidence designed to destroy my court, and you're presenting it as mercy. Do you think I'm senile enough to miss the threat?" Serafina spoke before Lucien could respond. "We're not threatening you, Your Majesty. We're offering you the chance to be remembered as the king who chose justice over corruption." The king laughed, sharp and bitter. Justice. The naivety required to believe that word means anything in politics is almost charming. "My husband died because he believed justice mattered," Serafina said quietly. "Hundreds of workers died because powerful people decided profit was worth more than human life. If you dismiss this evidence, you're complicit in their murders." Silence fell across the chamber like frost. No one spoke to the king that way, especially not a woman who'd been disgraced nobility 6 months ago. King Aldrich's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Leave the evidence," he said finally. "I'll review it personally. Return in 3 days for my decision." "Your Majesty, 3 days, Duke Draven. That's my offer. Accept it or face treason charges for threatening the crown." Lucien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We'll return in 3 days." They left without another word, walking through corridors that felt more like execution chambers. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd just accused the king of complicity and murder to his face. Either they'd won or they'd signed their own death warrants. "That went well," she said once they were in the carriage. Lucien stared out the window at the palace receding behind them. "He's going to bury it. You don't know that. I know him. I spent 16 years enforcing his will. He doesn't care about justice. He cares about stability, and this evidence threatens everything he's built his reign on. Then why did we give it to him? Because honor demanded we try the lawful approach before resorting to war. And now we wait 3 days. Then we release everything whether he acts or not." Serafina nodded, trying to ignore the dread settling into her bones. They'd crossed the point of no return. Whatever happened next would reshape the kingdom or destroy them entirely. Possibly both, but the summons arrived 2 days later, 24 hours before their scheduled return to the palace. Not from the king, from Captain Thorne. "Urgent. Come to the North Tower immediately. Don't bring guards." Lucien read the message twice, his expression going cold. "Something's wrong." Serafina grabbed her coat. "Then we go together." "No. You stay with the children. Lock the doors. Trust no one until I return." "Lucien." "That's an order, Duchess." She wanted to argue, to demand he stop protecting her like she was fragile, but the look in his eyes silenced her. This wasn't control. It was fear. "Be careful," she whispered. He left without answering. Serafina returned to the children's wing, gathered Thomas, Catherine, Margaret, and Isadora into one room, and locked the door. Then she waited, knife hidden beneath her sleeve, listening to Blackmir's silence and wondering what was happening in the North Tower. An hour passed, then two. When Lucien finally returned, his face carried an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not calculation, devastation. "What happened?" she asked. He sat heavily in a chair, hands shaking slightly. "Captain Thorne is dead, found in the North Tower with his throat cut. And the evidence is gone. All of it. Every document we compiled, every piece of proof, stolen." The words hit like physical blows. Serafina felt the room tilt. How is that possible? The North Tower is the most secure location in Blackmere. Someone with access killed Thorne and took everything. Someone we trusted. Who? Lucien's expression hardened into something terrifying. "I don't know yet, but whoever it was knew exactly where we kept the evidence, knew Thorne's schedule, knew how to move through Blackmere without being seen. An inside job." Yes. Serafina's mind raced. The servants had been with Blackmere for years. The guards were loyal to Lucien personally. Dr. Rennick was terrified of everything. Mrs. Halloway would die before betraying them. Unless... "The tutors," she said slowly. "The ones you brought in to educate me and the children. We vetted them, but we don't know them." "Not really." Lucien stood abruptly. "Where are they now?" "I don't know. They weren't scheduled for lessons today. Find them, every single one. I want them in the interrogation chamber within the hour." They found two of the three tutors in their quarters, confused and terrified by the accusations. The economics tutor, the military strategy captain. Both had alibis, both could account for their movements. The political theory professor was gone. His room was empty, belongings removed, no trace of his presence except a single piece of paper on the desk. Serafina picked it up with shaking hands. It was a letter, written in elegant script that made her stomach turn. To the Duke and Duchess of Blackmere. By the time you read this, the evidence you so carefully compiled will be in the hands of those it was meant to destroy. I regret the deception, but survival requires difficult choices. You, of all people, should understand that. The consortium offered me something you never could. Immunity. Wealth. A position far from this frozen wasteland you call home. In exchange, I provided them with your investigation timeline, your target list, and eventually the evidence itself. Captain Thorne died quickly. He was a good man serving a doomed cause. Consider this a lesson in trust. There is no loyalty that cannot be purchased, no alliance that cannot be broken. You gambled everything on destroying the consortium, and you lost because you forgot the first rule of power. Everyone has a price. The letter wasn't signed. Serafina read it 3 times, each word carving itself into her memory. Then she handed it to Lucien and watched his face transform into something inhuman. He didn't speak, didn't rage. He simply crumpled the paper in his fist and walked to the window, staring out at Blackmere's grounds with eyes that had gone completely empty. "Lucien," she said quietly, "we lost." The words hung in the air like execution verdicts. "We can still fight," Serafina insisted. "We'll compile new evidence. There is no new evidence. Everything we had took 6 years to gather. Witnesses are dead. Documents were originals. The consortium knows our entire strategy now. They'll destroy any attempt to rebuild. Then we'll use something else. What?" He turned from the window, and the devastation in his face was absolute. "We have nothing, Serafina. No leverage, no proof, no allies who can't be bought. We played our only hand and lost because I was arrogant enough to believe loyalty still existed. You couldn't have known. I should have. I've spent my entire life understanding that everyone betrays everyone eventually. I just forgot to apply that knowledge to my own house." Serafina felt something crack in her chest. They'd spent months building toward this moment, sacrificing sleep and safety and whatever innocence they had left, and it was gone. Stolen by someone they'd trusted with their children's education. The irony was almost funny. "What do we do now?" she asked. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the kind of finality that came before terrible decisions. "We survive. We protect the children. We retreat into Blackmere and hope the consortium is satisfied with their victory. That's surrender. That's reality. We don't have the resources to continue this fight, so Edmund's death means nothing. The workers who died in those mines mean nothing. Your sister means nothing. His hand moved so fast she barely saw it, slamming into the wall beside her head hard enough to crack stone. When he spoke, his voice was barely human. Don't you dare tell me what my sister's death means. Don't you dare stand there and accuse me of cowardice when I've spent 6 years trying to avenge her while you were playing happy family with a husband too naive to survive? Serafina met his eyes without flinching. Then stop acting like we're beaten. We're only beaten if we accept defeat. We have no evidence. We have our testimony, which will be dismissed as lies from disgraced nobles seeking attention. We have public opinion, which the consortium controls through newspapers and ministers. We have each other. That stopped him. Lucian stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. What? He said flatly. We have each other, Serafina repeated. You taught me that power isn't about evidence or proof. It's about will, about being willing to do what others won't, about survival through any means necessary. Your point. My point is that we're not dead yet. We're still standing. We still have resources, influence, and the willingness to destroy anyone who threatens us. The evidence was just one weapon. We'll find others. Like what? I don't know yet, but I refuse to believe we've come this far just to surrender because one man betrayed us. Lucian studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Not hope, nothing so optimistic, but recognition. The acknowledgement that she'd become exactly what he'd tried to shape her into. Dangerous, ruthless, unwilling to quit. You're right, he said quietly. We're not finished. Good. So what's our next move? He pulled her close, kissed her hard enough to bruise, then released her and moved toward the door. We find the professor, we make him tell us who bought him and how much they paid. Then we use that information to fracture the consortium from inside. And if we can't find him, we will. I've hunted men across 3 kingdoms and never lost a target. He'll surface eventually, and when he does, I'll make him regret the day he was born. The search lasted 5 days. Lucien mobilized every contact, every informant, every spy network he'd built during 16 years as Royal Inquisitor. Serafina worked beside him, learning the machinery of intelligence gathering, understanding how information flowed through criminal channels and legitimate ones alike. They found nothing. The professor had vanished like smoke. No sightings, no travel records, no financial transactions. Either he was dead or protected by people with resources matching Lucien's own. On the 6th day, a messenger arrived at Blackmir's gates. Royal summons. The king demanded Lucian's presence immediately to answer questions regarding Captain Thorne's murder and missing crown property. Crown property, Serafina said, reading the summons. He's claiming the evidence belonged to the kingdom. Of course he is. Lucian pulled on his coat with mechanical precision. The consortium must have delivered everything to him. Now he'll use it as justification to arrest me for theft and treason. They can't prove you took anything. They don't need proof. They need accusations and a king willing to believe them. Then don't go. It's obviously a trap. Refusing a royal summons means war. They'll march troops to Blackmir within days. Let them. We'll fight. With what army? He looked at her with eyes that had accepted the inevitable. We have 50 guards. The crown has thousands. This isn't a battle we can win through force. Serafina grabbed his arm. Then we run. Take the children and flee to the northern provinces. Disappear and live as fugitives while the consortium hunts us forever. He pulled free gently. No, I won't condemn your children to that life. Better fugitives than dead. Maybe. But I have another option. What? I surrender myself, confess to Thorne's murder, claim I acted alone. The crown executes me, and you and the children are spared. The words hit like knives. Serafina felt her breath stop. No. Serafina. No, absolutely not. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. It's not your decision. Like hell it isn't. I'm your wife. We're partners. You don't get to play martyr without consulting me. There's nothing to consult about. This is the only way to protect. She kissed him. Hard and desperate and furious, pouring every ounce of rage and fear into the contact. When she pulled back, tears were streaming down her face. We survive together or we die together, she said. That was the promise. You don't get to break it because things got difficult. Lucian wiped her tears with hands that had killed dozens and protected her children with equal dedication. His expression carried something close to grief. "I can't protect you anymore," he whispered. "I've lost the evidence, lost our leverage, lost everything that kept you safe. If I don't give them a target, they'll come for all of us. Then we give them a different target." "What?" Serafina's mind raced, fragments of strategy clicking into place. "We tell the king the professor stole the evidence on consortium orders. We frame this as a conspiracy against the crown itself. Make them the traitors instead of us. They'll deny it. Of course they will. But it plants doubt, creates conflict within their ranks. If we're lucky, they'll start turning on each other trying to prove loyalty. That's a desperate gamble. We're out of good options. Desperate is all we have left." Lucian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "When did you become this ruthless? You taught me. Now use what you created." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he pulled her close and held her like she was the only solid thing in a world collapsing around them. "Fine," he said. "We'll try your plan. But if it fails, it won't. If it fails, I want you to take the children and run. Don't look back. Don't try to save me. Just survive." Serafina didn't answer. She wouldn't lie to him, and she wouldn't promise something she'd never keep. The audience with this king happened at midnight. They entered the throne room to find it packed with nobles. The entire consortium leadership, ministers, judges, every person they'd planned to destroy now gathered like predators watching wounded prey. Lord Chancellor Wexford stood beside the throne, his expression triumphant. King Aldrich sat elevated above them all, ancient and terrible, power radiating from him like heat from forge fires. "Duke Draven," he said. "Duchess, you stand accused of theft of crown property, conspiracy against the realm, and the murder of Captain Thorne of your household guard. How do you answer these charges?" Lucian stepped forward, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the circumstances. "We deny all charges, Your Majesty. The evidence in question was compiled through private investigation over 6 years. It documented criminal negligence within the Royal Mining Consortium, resulting in hundreds of worker deaths. Convenient that this evidence has vanished," Wexford said smoothly, "along with the captain who supposedly safeguarded it." "It was stolen," Serafina said clearly, "by our political theory tutor. A man we now know was planted by consortium members to spy on our investigation. He murdered Captain Thorne and delivered everything to the people it implicated." The nobles erupted in outrage. Wexford's face went purple. "Preposterous," he shouted. "You have no proof of these wild accusations." "We have his confession," Serafina said, pulling the letter from her coat. Written in his own hand, admitting to theft and murder on behalf of unnamed consortium members. She handed it to the king's attendant. Aldrich read it slowly, his expression unreadable. "This letter admits to theft," he said finally. "It does not name any consortium members specifically." "Because he was protecting his employers," Lucian said. "But the implication is clear. Someone within this room paid him to destroy our investigation. Or you fabricated this letter to deflect blame," Wexford countered. "Your Majesty, these people have demonstrated complete disregard for law and propriety. They've made wild accusations against your most loyal subjects. They've stolen crown property and murdered one of their own staff to cover their crimes. Justice demands—" "Silence," the king said quietly. The room fell completely still. Aldrich stood slowly, moving with the careful precision of age and absolute power. He looked at the assembled nobles with eyes that had watched kingdoms rise and fall. "I have reviewed the evidence delivered to me," he said. "All of it. Financial records, death certificates, correspondence, testimony. And I find myself facing an uncomfortable truth." He turned his gaze to the consortium members. Much of what the Duke and Duchess claim appears to be accurate. Safety inspections were falsified. Bribes were paid. Workers died while officials looked away. This is not the kingdom I built my reign upon. Lord Chancellor Wexford's face went white. "Your Majesty, surely you don't believe I believe what the evidence shows me. However, I also believe in order, in stability, in the understanding that sometimes justice must be balanced against the greater good." He looked at Lucian and Serafina. "You were right to bring this to my attention. But you were wrong to threaten public release. That kind of chaos serves no one." "Then what do you propose?" Serafina asked. King Aldrich smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd survived 7 decades of political maneuvering through absolute ruthlessness. "I propose a compromise. The consortium members will face private consequences. Fines, removal from certain positions, quiet retribution that maintains order while delivering punishment. In exchange, you will cease your public campaign and accept that justice has been served. That's not justice, Lucian said flatly. That's appeasement. That's civilization. The alternative is war. Then we choose war. The words echoed through the throne room like thunder. Every noble present understood what Lucien had just done. He'd rejected the king's compromise, declared open rebellion against the crown itself. King Aldrich's expression hardened. You would choose chaos over order, hundreds of deaths over managed consequences, the destruction of everything I've built over your personal vendetta. This isn't personal, Serafina said. It's about preventing the next 100 deaths, the next family destroyed by people who believe power makes them untouchable. Noble sentiment, ultimately irrelevant. He gestured, and royal guards surrounded them instantly. 20 men with weapons drawn, cutting off any escape. I offered you mercy, the king said. You rejected it. Therefore, Duke Lucian Draven, Duchess Serafina Draven, I hereby charge you both with high treason against the crown. You will be held in the palace dungeons pending trial and execution. Your Majesty, Serafina started, but guards grabbed her arms before she could continue. Lucien didn't fight. He simply looked at the king with something approaching pity. You're making a mistake. No, I'm choosing stability over chaos. History will remember me kindly for it. History remembers a lot of things, Lucian said quietly. Not all of them kind. The guards dragged them from the throne room while nobles watched in satisfaction. Wexford was smiling. The consortium members were already celebrating their victory. Serafina caught Lucien's eyes as they were separated into different cells. The children, she mouthed. He nodded once. Mrs. Halloway would protect them, get them to safety. That had been the contingency plan all along, but as iron doors slammed shut and darkness swallowed her whole, Serafina understood the full weight of what had just happened. They'd lost everything. The evidence, their freedom, their lives, probably, once the trial concluded. And somewhere in Blackmere, her children were waking to the news that their mother and the man who'd protected them were both condemned traitors awaiting execution. She'd promised to keep them safe. She'd failed. 3 days in the dungeon changed everything, not physically. The cell was cold and dark, but Serafina had survived worse. It was the isolation that carved into her, the knowledge that somewhere above her the kingdom was celebrating her downfall while her children were alone. On the 4th day, a visitor arrived. Lord Chancellor Wexford, escorted by guards, looking at her through iron bars like she was an amusing curiosity. Duchess Draven, he said pleasantly, how are you finding your accommodations? Go to hell. I've been. Turns out it's quite comfortable when you're on the winning side. He pulled a chair close to the bars, sat like he was settling in for a long conversation. I wanted to thank you personally, he continued. Your husband's investigation actually proved quite useful. We've identified several consortium members who were becoming problematic and used your evidence to remove them quietly. Saved us the trouble of fabricating charges ourselves. Serafina felt ice flood her veins. You're using the evidence we compiled. Of course, it's quite thorough. The king has already ordered private prosecutions for the most egregious offenders. Fines paid directly into the royal treasury, some removals from public office. Everyone maintains their social standing, but certain behaviors will be curtailed. That's not justice. That's politics. And it's far more effective than your scorched earth approach would have been. You're still protecting murderers. I'm maintaining order. There's a difference. Not to the families who lost people. Wexford smiled. Those families will receive compensation. Generous compensation, actually, funded by the fines we're collecting. Everyone wins except you and your self-righteous husband. Serafina moved closer to the bars. What do you want, Wexford? I want you to understand something. You lost because you fundamentally misunderstood how power works. You thought exposing corruption would destroy us. Instead, it just gave us an opportunity to consolidate control while appearing to pursue justice. His expression hardened. Your husband will be executed in 2 days. You'll follow a week later. Your children will be placed under state custody, raised by families who understand loyalty to the crown. Everything you fought for will be erased. She felt tears burn behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to die knowing you accomplished nothing, that your husband's death was meaningless. That your children will grow up believing you were traitors. That's the real punishment. He stood, adjusted his robes. Goodbye, Duchess. Enjoy your remaining time. He left, and Serafina sat in darkness, listening to his footsteps fade. Then she started laughing. Quietly at first, then louder, until the guards outside her cell were muttering nervously, because Wexford had just told her everything she needed to know. The consortium was fracturing. The king was using their evidence. The noble families were turning on each other. And most importantly, her children were still alive, which meant there was still hope. She just had to survive long enough to use it. The escape attempt came on the 6th day. Serafina woke to find her cell door open, a guard uniform folded on the floor, and a note written in familiar handwriting. Mrs. Halloway, follow the service corridors to the eastern gate. Don't trust anyone. The children are safe. She dressed quickly, pulled the guard's helmet low, and stepped into the corridor. Empty. Too empty. This had to be a trap. But staying meant execution, so she moved. Through narrow passages, servants used to navigate the palace unseen, past storage rooms and kitchens. The eastern gate loomed ahead, guarded by 2 men who didn't look at her twice as she walked past wearing stolen uniform. Then she was outside, breathing free air, running through palace gardens toward the walls. Almost there. Almost. Guards erupted from everywhere, 20 men surrounding her, weapons drawn. She'd been herded exactly where they wanted her. A figure stepped from the shadows, and Serafina's heart stopped. The political theory professor. Alive. Smiling. Did you really think it would be that easy? He asked. Serafina said nothing, just measured distances, calculated odds, accepted that she was probably about to die. The king wanted proof you'd attempt escape, the professor continued. Justification for immediate execution without trial. You've provided it beautifully. She could fight. Die on her feet instead of her knees. That had value. Or she could use the only weapon she had left. Truth. Tell me something, she said loudly. Loud enough for every guard to hear. How much did they pay you to betray people who trusted you? The professor's smile faltered. How much is loyalty worth these days, she continued. Because I'm genuinely curious. Captain Thorne died protecting information that could have saved hundreds of lives. You killed him for money. I'd like to know the exact price of a good man's life. The guards were listening. She could see it in their faces. 30,000, she guessed. 40. Enough to live comfortably in a foreign province. Enough to forget you murdered someone who never did anything except serve honorably. Shut up. The consortium promised you safety, didn't they? Immunity. But you're here doing their work like a trained dog, which means they don't trust you either, which means you're disposable. I said, shut up. You killed for people who'll kill you the moment you're inconvenient. That's the real tragedy. You didn't even betray us for security. You betrayed us for a lie. The professor moved fast, blade appearing in his hand, lunging toward her with murder in his eyes. Serafina twisted, grabbed his wrist, drove her knee into his stomach. The blade clattered to the ground. Guards surged forward, but she was already talking, still loud, still clear. He's here to kill me before I can testify, before I can name every consortium member who paid him, before I can expose how deep the corruption runs. Stop her, the professor gasped. Why? Serafina demanded. Because I'm telling the truth. Because every person here knows the kingdom is rotting from inside, and the people in power would rather kill witnesses than address it. She looked directly at the guards. You're all complicit, following orders to protect murderers, arresting people who tried to stop systematic killing. Is that really the legacy you want? Silence fell across the garden. Then one guard lowered his weapon. Then another. The professor screamed in rage, grabbed for the fallen blade, and died when a guard's sword took him through the throat. The captain of the guard looked at Serafina with something approaching respect. What now, Duchess? Now, she said. You help me finish what we started, or you kill me and prove I was right about everything. The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he sheathed his sword and nodded. The guard captain's name was Marcus Hale, and he'd served the crown for 23 years without questioning a single order until tonight. He looked at Serafina standing in the palace gardens with the professor's blood pooling at her feet and made a choice that would either save the kingdom or destroy it. We need to move, he said quietly, before someone realizes what just happened. Where's my husband? Serafina demanded. The North Tower, maximum security. They're moving him to the execution platform at dawn. Dawn was 3 hours away. Not enough time to plan, barely enough to act. Serafina felt her heart hammering against her ribs, adrenaline flooding through her system like fire. How many guards? 50 between here and there, plus the executioner's detail already assembled at the platform. Can you get me inside? Hale was quiet for a moment, calculating odds that probably ended with his own execution. Then he nodded. I can get you to the tower entrance. After that, you're on your own. Good enough? They moved through the palace like ghosts, Hale's authority opening doors that should have stayed locked, past sleeping nobles and empty corridors. Twice they encountered other guards, and twice Hale's presence convinced them nothing was wrong. The North Tower loomed ahead, black stone rising toward a sky just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. Hale stopped at the entrance, handed Serafina a ring of keys. 3rd floor, eastern cell. The guards change shift in 10 minutes. That's your window. Why are you helping me? She asked. Because my brother died in the Greystone mines, crushed beneath equipment that should have been replaced years ago. He left a wife and 3 children who got nothing except condolences from people who profited from his death. Hale's expression hardened. Your husband tried to give them justice. The least I can do is give him a chance to finish the fight. He turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone at the base of the tower with stolen keys and minutes counting down like heartbeats. Serafina climbed. The stairs spiraled upward through darkness, broken only by occasional torches. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. She ignored both, driven by something beyond physical limitation. Desperation, maybe. Or the understanding that if she failed now, everything they'd sacrificed meant nothing. 3rd floor, eastern corridor. 2 guards posted outside an iron door. She stepped into the torchlight with the keys visible in her hand. Relief shift, she said calmly. Captain Hale sent me. The guards looked at each other, confused. We weren't notified of early relief. New orders. The Duke's being moved to the platform ahead of schedule. That made sense to them. Nobles changed plans constantly. The guards shrugged, grabbed their weapons, and headed for the stairs. Serafina waited until their footsteps faded, then unlocked the cell. Lucien sat against the far wall with his hands chained to the floor and blood dried across his face. Someone had beaten him, probably multiple times, but his eyes were still sharp, still dangerous, still absolutely aware. Serafina, he said quietly. She knelt beside him, working the locks with shaking hands. We're leaving. How did you... Later. We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize something's wrong. The chains fell away. Lucien stood slowly, testing his balance, and she saw the full extent of his injuries. Broken ribs, probably. Definitely a fractured hand. Cuts and bruises covering every visible surface. But he was standing. That was enough. Can you fight? She asked. I can kill. Close enough. They moved into the corridor just as alarm bells started ringing throughout the palace. Someone had discovered the professor's body, or noticed Serafina's escape, or realized Lucien's cell was empty. Didn't matter which, the result was the same. The entire palace was waking up, and they were trapped in the North Tower with an army between them and freedom. Lucien grabbed a sword from the wall display, tested its weight, and looked at Serafina with something approaching a smile. Ideas, Duchess. We fight our way to the children and run. That's not a plan. That's suicide. You have a better option. No. But at least we'll die together. The first guards hit the stairs 30 seconds later. 6 men, armored and trained, moving with professional efficiency. Lucien met them at the landing with violence that defied his injuries. He moved like death itself, every strike calculated for maximum damage. The confined space worked in his favor, preventing the guards from using their numbers. One went down with his throat opened. Another fell screaming with a sword through his stomach. A third died so fast he never saw the blade coming. Serafina grabbed a fallen weapon and fought beside him, using everything he'd taught her. Aim for weak points. Use momentum against them. Survival doesn't require honor, just effectiveness. She killed her first man when he lunged past Lucien, drove the blade into his side between armor plates, and felt warm blood spray across her face. The shock of it froze her for a heartbeat. Then training took over, and she was moving again, fighting again, becoming exactly what this world required. More guards poured into the stairwell. Too many. Lucien was slowing, blood loss and exhaustion catching up with him. Serafina's arms burned from blocking strikes. They were going to die here, trapped in this tower, and her children would wake to find both parents executed. Then Marcus Hale appeared with 20 guards loyal to him, and the tide shifted. The north exit, Hale shouted. "I've got horses waiting." They fought through the tower, leaving bodies behind them. Out into the palace grounds where dawn was breaking across the eastern horizon. Horses stamping nervously, breath fogging in cold air. Lucien pulled himself into the saddle through sheer will. Seraphina mounted beside him, and Hale handed her reins with blood on his hands. "Blackmere," he said, "get your children and run. The king will send armies after you, but at least you'll have a head start. Come with us." "I'm staying. Someone needs to slow them down." Hale looked at Lucien with respect that bordered on reverence. "Finish what you started, Your Grace. Make it mean something." "I will." They rode, through the palace gates while alarms screamed and guards scrambled, into the city streets as dawn turned the sky from black to gray to pale gold. Merchants were opening shops, workers heading to factories, normal people living normal lives while nobility fled execution. The ride to Blackmere took 3 hours at full gallop. Seraphina's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Lucien swayed multiple times, nearly falling, held upright by will alone. Behind them, pursuit was organizing. Royal troops mounting, tracking dogs being released, the full weight of the crown mobilizing to crush their rebellion. They reached Blackmere's gates as the sun climbed toward noon. Mrs. Halloway met them in the courtyard with all 4 children, bags already packed, escape plan down to the minute. "Thank God," she whispered. "I thought—" "No time," Lucien interrupted. "How many guards are still loyal?" 30. "The rest fled when news of your arrest reached us. Not enough to hold against the crown's forces. We need to evacuate everyone." Thomas stepped forward, trying to look brave despite being terrified. "Where are we going?" "North," Seraphina said, pulling her son close. "Beyond the kingdom's reach. Somewhere safe." "Nowhere safe from the king," Catherine said quietly. She was right, and everyone knew it. They could run to foreign provinces, hide in remote territories, disappear into populations that didn't care about Southern Kingdom politics. But the crown would hunt them. Forever. Until they were found and dragged back for public execution. Running meant living in fear until inevitability caught up. Lucien looked at his manor, this fortress that had been his family's seat for 3 centuries, at the walls and guards and legacy built through generations of Dravens who'd served the kingdom with varying degrees of honor. Then he looked at Seraphina and her children and made a decision that transformed everything. "We're not running," he said. The courtyard fell silent. "Lucien," Seraphina started. "No. Listen to me. We run. They win. They get to write history, tell the kingdom we were traitors, use our flight as proof of guilt. Everything we fought for dies with us." His voice strengthened despite his injuries, carrying absolute conviction. "But if we stand, if we make them come here and face us, if we force them to lay siege to Blackmere and execute us in our own home, then we become martyrs. Then the workers who lost family in those mines have a symbol. Then maybe something changes." "That's still death," Seraphina said. "Yes, but death with purpose." She stared at him, understanding what he was really saying. He wanted to turn Blackmere into a monument, wanted their last stand to matter, to inspire, to plant seeds of rebellion that might bloom after they were gone. It was insane, suicidal, absolutely hopeless. It was also the only choice that didn't abandon everything they'd fought for. Thomas spoke before Seraphina could. "I want to fight. You're 8 years old. I'm old enough to know when something's wrong. The king is protecting people who killed father. You and the Duke tried to stop them. That's worth fighting for." Catherine nodded. Margaret, too. Even Isadora, barely old enough to understand, seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Seraphina looked at her children, these small, fierce creatures who'd survived so much already, and felt something break open in her chest. She turned to Lucien. "If we do this, we do it right. No half measures. We release everything we know, every name, every crime, every piece of evidence we can reconstruct from memory. We tell the kingdom exactly why we're dying. Agreed, and we protect the children. Whatever happens, they survive." Lucien knelt before Thomas, Catherine, Margaret, and Isadora. His voice was gentle despite the violence written across his face. "I promise you'll live, even if it costs everything else." Mrs. Halloway stepped forward. "I'll take them. Through the northern passages to the coast. I have family in the fishing villages who'll hide them until it's safe." "When will it be safe?" Margaret asked. The adults had no answer for that. Seraphina gathered her children close, memorizing their faces. Thomas's determination, Catherine's quiet strength, Margaret's fierce intelligence, Isadora's innocent trust, This wasn't goodbye. It couldn't be goodbye, but it felt like standing at the edge of something final. Be brave, she whispered. Be smart. Survive. We will, Thomas promised. Mrs. Halloway led them toward the manor's hidden exits while Serafina watched through tears. Lucienne stood beside her, hand finding hers, fingers interlocking. Now what? She asked. Now we prepare for war. Ooh. The fortifications took 6 hours. Every able body in Blackmere worked like this was their last day alive, which it probably was. Barricades erected across approach roads, weapons distributed to servants who'd never held swords. Supplies moved to defendable positions. The 30 loyal guards drilled constantly, preparing for overwhelming odds. Lucian commanded it all from the courtyard, despite injuries that should have left him unconscious. Serafina worked beside him, learning military strategy through immediate application. The east wall is our weak point, Captain Voss reported. We don't have enough men to defend the full perimeter. Then we don't defend the full perimeter, Lucien said. We funnel them toward the main gate, create a kill zone, make them pay for every foot of ground. That's delaying, not winning. I'm aware. But the longer we hold, the more time we buy for the truth to spread. Serafina had spent the morning writing. Not a defense or justification, just facts. Names of consortium members, details of crimes committed, testimony from workers who'd survived the mines. A complete accounting of corruption compressed into a document that couldn't be denied or dismissed. She'd made 50 copies and sent writers in every direction with instructions to distribute them publicly. By now, the entire kingdom knew why Duke and Duchess Draven were making their last stand. The royal army arrived at sunset, 500 soldiers, siege equipment, command structure designed for crushing rebellions. They surrounded Blackmere with professional efficiency, cutting off escape routes, establishing supply lines, preparing for either quick assault or prolonged siege. A herald approached under white flag, reading from a formal decree. By order of His Majesty King Aldrich, Duke Lucian Draven and Duchess Serafina Draven are commanded to surrender immediately. You will be granted fair trial and execution in accordance with law. Refusal will result in total assault and no quarter given to any inhabitant of this fortress. Lucian stood on the walls looking down at 500 men ready to kill him. Tell the king he can come take us himself if he wants us that badly. The herald blinked. Your Grace, please be reasonable. I'm being perfectly reasonable. You're asking me to walk to my own execution. I'm declining. That seems like sound decision-making. Sir, if you refuse, I am refusing. Now leave before I have archers demonstrate exactly how seriously I take this siege. The herald retreated. The army settled into position. Siege engines began assembling, massive trebuchets designed to reduce walls to rubble. Serafina joined Lucian on the ramparts. How long can we hold? Day. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. And then they breach the walls, kill everyone inside, and write history however they want. She leaned against him despite the armor and weapons between them. Was this the right choice? Lucienne was quiet for a moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon. I don't know, but it's the choice we made, and I wouldn't change it, even knowing we'll die, especially knowing that. At least this way we die standing. The first assault came at midnight, 200 soldiers hitting the main gate with battering rams while archers provided cover fire. Lucien's defenders responded with boiling oil and crossbow bolts, turning the approach into a killing ground. Bodies piled up. The rams shattered against reinforced gates. The assault broke after 20 minutes, leaving 30 royal soldiers dead. But the siege equipment was nearly assembled. By dawn, the trebuchets were operational. By mid-morning, they started firing. Stone projectiles crashed into Blackmere's walls with sounds like the world ending. Each impact sent shockwaves through the fortress. Defenders ducked behind crenellations while rubble rained down. The east wall took 5 direct hits and developed a crack that would become a breach within hours. Lucien stood in the courtyard, coordinating defense like he'd done this 1,000 times. Serafina worked beside him, learning to think tactically even as the world collapsed around them. When the east wall fails, she said, they'll pour through. We'll be waiting, with 30 guards against 500 soldiers, 30 guards who are fighting for something they believe in, that counts for more than numbers. Does it? We're about to find out. The wall collapsed at noon, stone and mortar crumbling inward, creating a breach 20 feet wide. Royal soldiers surged forward immediately, screaming battle cries, weapons raised. Lucien's defenders met them in the gap with fury that defied odds. The fighting was brutal, close-quarters horror, where strategy meant nothing and survival was measured in heartbeats. Serafina fought with the sword she barely knew how to use, blocking strikes through instinct, counterattacking through desperation. She killed 3 men in the first 10 minutes, lost count after that. Beside her, Lucien fought like he was born for this. Despite broken ribs and fractured hand and exhaustion that should have killed him, he moved with lethal precision. Every strike found flesh. Every movement created space for defenders who were outmatched, but not outfought. They held the breach for an hour. Then Captain Voss went down with a spear through his chest. Then 2 more defenders fell. Then 5. The line was collapsing. Lucien grabbed Serafina's arm, pulled her back toward the manor's inner keep. "Fall back," he shouted. "Controlled retreat." They abandoned the breach, retreating through the courtyard while royal soldiers flooded through the gap. Defenders fired crossbows from windows, dropped stones from upper floors, made the invaders pay for every foot. But they were losing. Slowly, inevitably, absolutely. Lucien and Serafina reached the Great Hall with 12 remaining defenders. They barricaded the doors, knowing it would buy minutes at most. "This is it," Lucien said quietly. Serafina looked at him. This man she'd married for survival, who'd become something far more valuable. Partner. Ally. The person who taught her that power wasn't about control, but about protecting what mattered. "I don't regret any of it," she said. "Neither do I." They kissed once, hard and desperate, while battering rams hit the Great Hall doors. Then the doors exploded inward, and the final battle began. Royal soldiers poured into the hall. Lucien met them with a roar that belonged to something more than human. He fought like a wolf with its back to the wall, all technique abandoned in favor of pure survival instinct. Serafina fought beside him, their movements synchronized through necessity, back to back, protecting each other, buying seconds that felt like eternity. One by one, the remaining defenders fell. Until it was just Lucien and Serafina standing in a hall filled with bodies, surrounded by 50 royal soldiers with weapons drawn. Lord Chancellor Wexford stepped through the carnage, flanked by guards, looking at them with satisfaction. "Impressive," he said, "but ultimately pointless." Lucien spat blood. "We released the evidence. The entire kingdom knows what you did. And they'll forget within a month. People always do." "Not this time." Wexford smiled. "You're wrong, but you won't live long enough to see it." He gestured, and soldiers moved forward to seize them. Then a voice cut through the hall, clear and absolute. "Stop." Everyone turned. King Aldrich stood in the doorway, flanked by his personal guard, looking at the scene with eyes that had watched kingdoms rise and fall. He walked slowly into the hall, examining the bodies, the destruction, the 2 people still standing despite everything. When he reached Lucien and Serafina, he studied them like artifacts from a forgotten age. "You've cost me dearly," he said quietly. "Hundreds of soldiers dead. My kingdom in chaos. Nobles demanding your execution. The common people demanding your vindication." "Then what happens now?" Serafina asked. The king looked at her for a long moment, then he smiled. "Now," he said, "we negotiate." The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Negotiate. Serafina stared at the king standing amid the carnage of Blackmere's great hall, surrounded by bodies of soldiers who died following his orders, and tried to understand if she'd heard correctly. Lucien's grip on his sword tightened. "There's nothing to negotiate, Your Majesty. You came here to execute us." King Aldrich looked at the hall, at the destruction, at the cost of crushing 2 people who refused to surrender. His expression carried something Serafina hadn't expected. Exhaustion. "I came here to end a problem," he said quietly. "What I found instead is something far more complicated." He gestured to his guards, who lowered their weapons slightly. Not sheathed, just lowered, a gesture of temporary truce. "Your evidence has spread through the kingdom faster than plague. Every tavern, every market, every worker's district. People are reading testimony about mining deaths, about nobles profiting from negligence, about systematic corruption protected by the crown itself." "Good," Serafina said. "Is it?" The king's voice hardened. 3 cities are already rioting, The mining districts have gone on strike. Noble families are fleeing to foreign provinces while workers demand their execution. You wanted to expose corruption. Congratulations. You've destabilized the entire realm. That's not our fault? No. It's mine. The admission silenced the hall. Lord Chancellor Wexford started to protest, but Aldrich raised a hand sharply. I allowed the consortium to operate unchecked because stability seemed more important than justice. I buried investigations because scandal threatened the treasury. I protected nobles who deserved execution because revolution seemed worse than corruption. He looked directly at Lucian. And you, Duke Draven, spent 16 years enforcing my will, crushing dissent, eliminating threats, serving the crown with absolute loyalty while I used you to maintain a system built on blood. The words landed like physical blows. Lucian's face went carefully blank, but Seraphina saw the truth ripple beneath. He'd known. On some level, he'd always known, but hearing the king admit it transformed understanding into something heavier. Complicity. Why are you telling us this? Lucian asked. Because I'm 72 years old and tired of pretending. Because you forced me to choose between maintaining a lie and confronting truth. Because maybe it's time for this kingdom to stop devouring its best people to feed its worst. King Aldrich moved to the window overlooking Blackmere's destroyed courtyard. Dawn was breaking across the horizon, painting devastation in shades of gold and crimson. Here's what I'm offering, he said. You surrender peacefully. Face trial. I personally guarantee the trial will be fair, the evidence will be heard, and the verdict will reflect truth rather than political convenience. That's not a negotiation, Seraphina said. That's execution with extra steps. Perhaps, but it's execution that matters. Your trial becomes the platform for exposing everything you've compiled. Every noble, every minister, every crime. The kingdom watches as justice is actually served for once. And we die anyway. Yes, but you die as martyrs who change the realm rather than traitors who merely caused chaos. Lucian laughed, sharp and bitter. You want us to accept death so you can use our execution to legitimize reforms you should have implemented decades ago. I want you to accept that change requires sacrifice. Sometimes the sacrifice is power. Sometimes it's life itself. The king turned from the window, and his expression carried genuine regret. I can't let you live. The nobles would never accept it. The court would rebel, and civil war would consume everything. But I can make your deaths mean something. I can use your trial to prosecute the consortium, reform the mining regulations, establish worker protections that actually function. Wexford stepped forward, face purple with rage. Your Majesty, this is insanity. We cannot negotiate with traitors who— You're under arrest, Lord Chancellor. Silence crashed across the hall like thunder. Aldrich looked at Wexford with absolute authority. Based on evidence compiled by the Duke and Duchess Draven, you're charged with accepting bribes, falsifying safety reports, and conspiring to murder citizens who threaten consortium profits. You'll stand trial alongside every other noble implicated in this corruption. Wexford's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he lunged for his weapon. Royal guards cut him down before he'd drawn the blade halfway. He collapsed choking on blood, staring at the king with betrayed fury. Anyone else want to question my authority? Aldrich asked the remaining nobles quietly. No one moved. The king looked back at Lucian and Seraphina. So, do we have terms? Seraphina felt Lucien's hand find hers, fingers interlocking. She thought about her children fleeing north with Mrs. Halloway, about workers who died in mines while nobles profited, about Edmund and everything he'd believed about justice and honor and the possibility of change. She thought about whether dying for something was better than living with nothing. One condition, she said, name it. Our children. Complete immunity, full pardons, restoration of titles and estates. They grow up free of this stain. Agreed. And we want it documented. Witnessed. Sealed with the royal signet so no future king can overturn it. Done. Lucien spoke next, voice rough with exhaustion and pain. And the workers, the families who lost people in the mines, they receive compensation from consortium assets. Real compensation, not token gestures. I'll establish a royal fund personally, supervised by independent auditors to prevent further corruption. Not good enough, Seraphina said. We want worker representatives on the oversight board, people who actually understand mining conditions, who can't be bought by nobles looking to continue the same practices under different names. The king was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Agreed. Anything else? Lucien looked at the bodies scattered across the hall, the soldiers who'd died following orders, the defenders who'd fallen protecting people they believed in. I want every man who died today honored. Royal funeral, full benefits to their families, monuments erected so the kingdom remembers what this cost. You're negotiating memorials for people who died trying to arrest you. I'm negotiating recognition that they were doing their duty, just like I did for 16 years. The fact that duty served corruption doesn't make their sacrifice less real. Something shifted in the king's expression. Respect, maybe. A recognition that Lucien understood exactly what they'd all been complicit in. Done, Aldrich said. Anything else? Serafina thought about everything they'd fought for, everything they'd lost, everything that still needed changing in a kingdom built on exploitation. The mining regulations, she said, we want specific reforms written into law before our trial begins. Maximum working hours, mandatory safety equipment, independent inspections, criminal liability for nobles who profit from worker deaths. That will take weeks to draft properly. Then our trial waits until it's finished. We're not dying to make you look merciful while the system continues unchanged. The king studied her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of negotiations over 7 decades. You're quite remarkable, Duchess Draven. Your husband chose well. I chose well, Lucien said quietly. She was remarkable long before I found her. Aldrich smiled slightly. Very well. The reforms will be drafted, approved, and implemented before your trial commences. You have my word. Your word buried investigations and protected murderers for years. Yes. But I'm offering you the chance to change that, to make your deaths the catalyst for reforms that actually last. Take it or refuse it, but decide now. My army is tired, your fortress is destroyed, and we're all running out of time. Serafina looked at Lucien, really looked at him. This man who'd saved her from the snow, who'd taught her survival through violence, who'd become something she never expected when she accepted his protection. Partner. Husband. The person who'd shown her that strength wasn't about enduring alone, but about choosing who deserved your loyalty. His eyes asked the question without words. She nodded. Lucien turned to the king. We accept your terms. We surrender for trial. We die publicly. And in exchange, you reform the system that made our deaths necessary. Agreed. And if you betray these terms, if you use our execution for political theater while changing nothing, then I suspect the kingdom will remember us fondly and you poorly. That's sufficient motivation. Guards moved forward, not roughly but firmly, placing Lucien and Serafina in chains that felt more ceremonial than necessary. They were already defeated. The chains just made it official. As they were led from the hall, Serafina looked back at Blackmere one final time. The manor where her children had learned to read and fight and survive, where she'd transformed from discarded widow into someone capable of threatening an entire kingdom. Goodbye, she whispered. The journey back to the capital took 3 days. They traveled in a royal carriage, wounded and exhausted, watching the countryside roll past while contemplating their approaching execution. No one spoke much. Words felt inadequate for measuring what they'd lost and what they'd gained. On the second night, camped beside a river with royal guards posted as much for protection as prevention of escape, Lucien finally broke the silence. Do you regret it? Serafina looked at him across the campfire. Which part? All of it. Accepting my protection, learning to fight, becoming someone who could stand in a throne room and threaten the king, everything that led us here. She was quiet for a long time, thinking about Edmund and the life they'd planned before power destroyed it, about her children who would grow up without her, about the price of justice and whether it was worth paying. No, she said finally, I don't regret any of it, even knowing how it ends, especially knowing that Edmund died believing justice mattered. I'm dying making sure it does. That seems like decent symmetry. Lucien stared into the fire like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. I spent my entire life serving power, enforcing it, protecting it, wielding it without question. And the only time I felt like I was doing something worthwhile was when I was protecting you and your children. You were protecting justice. No, I was protecting you. Justice was just the excuse. The honesty of it cut deeper than any blade. Serafina moved closer, ignoring the chains, and took his damaged hand in hers. Then maybe that's enough. Maybe protecting people who matter is a better legacy than serving systems that don't. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death and caused more. Do you think they'll remember us that way? I don't know. But our children will. That's what matters. The fire crackled between them, while guards pretended not to listen, and the river whispered past, carrying reflections of stars that would outlast kingdoms. They reached the capital on the fourth day to find it transformed. Workers lined the streets by thousands, silent and watching. Not hostile, not supportive, just bearing witness. Some held signs demanding justice. Others carried flowers. Most simply stood as the carriage passed, their presence a reminder that this execution mattered beyond noble politics. The palace had been prepared for spectacle. Scaffolding erected in the central square, seating for nobility, standing room for commoners, everything designed to make their trial and execution visible to the maximum number of witnesses. Lucien and Serafina were separated into different cells, allowed no contact before the trial began. Serafina spent 5 days in darkness, reviewing everything they'd fought for and wondering if any of it would survive their deaths. She wrote letters to her children that guards promised to deliver, instructions for living, apologies for leaving, hopes that they'd understand why this mattered enough to die for. On the morning of the trial, they brought her clean clothes and water to wash. She dressed carefully, choosing black that made her look like mourning itself, and walked to the courtroom with her head high. The chamber was packed, every noble family, hundreds of commoners, guards lining the walls. King Aldrich seated on a throne elevated above everyone, absolute authority made visible. Lucien was already present, chained but standing straight despite injuries that hadn't fully healed. When he saw her, something flickered in his expression. Not fear, not resignation, pride. The charges were read formally. Treason against the crown, theft of state property, murder of Captain Thorne, incitement to rebellion. Each accusation carried mandatory execution. How do you plead? The magistrate asked. Guilty, Lucien said clearly. To everything except murder. Captain Thorne was killed by the political theory professor working for consortium interests. But the rest, yes, guilty as charged. The chamber erupted. Nobles demanding immediate execution, commoners shouting support, the magistrate hammering for order while chaos consumed the room. King Aldrich raised his hand and silence fell instantly. You admit treason, he said. I admit opposing a corrupt system that killed innocents for profit. If that's treason, then yes, and you, Duchess Draven. Serafina met the king's eyes without flinching. I admit everything my husband admits. We fought together. We'll die together. Very well. However, before sentencing, this court will hear evidence regarding the charges that motivated your actions. For 3 days, the trial became exactly what the king had promised. A public accounting of consortium crimes. Financial records displayed for all to see. Testimony from workers who'd survived the mines. Documentation of bribes and falsified reports and systematic murder. Noble after noble was called to the stand. Some confessed. Some denied. All were confronted with evidence they couldn't dismiss. Lord Pemberton's family wept as his embezzlement was proven. Minister Blackwood hanged himself in his cell rather than face questioning. Duchess Harrington fled the kingdom entirely, abandoning estates and fortune to escape prosecution. The consortium collapsed in real time, destroyed by the evidence Lucien and Serafina had compiled and the king's willingness to actually enforce consequences. On the fourth day, the king announced reforms. Worker safety regulations enforced by independent inspectors. Criminal liability for nobles who profited from negligence. Compensation fund for affected families. Oversight boards including worker representatives. Everything Serafina had demanded codified into law. The commoners cheered. The nobles sat in stunned silence. History was being made, and they were watching their power erode in favor of something closer to actual justice. On the fifth day, sentencing arrived. Duke Lucien Draven and Duchess Serafina Draven, you have been found guilty of treason against the crown. However, this court acknowledges that your actions were motivated by genuine pursuit of justice against systematic corruption. Therefore, I offer final clemency. The chamber went completely silent. Abdicate your titles, the king said. Surrender all lands and holdings to the crown. Leave the kingdom permanently and never return. In exchange, your lives are spared and your children receive full pardons. Lucien Saucy and Serafina looked at each other across the courtroom. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They'd negotiated death, fought for meaningful execution, accepted that sacrifice was necessary. And now the king was offering exile instead. Why? Serafina asked. Because you were right, Aldrich said quietly. Because the kingdom needs to remember that pursuing justice shouldn't require dying for it. Because maybe mercy matters as much as punishment. He leaned forward. Take the offer. Live. Raise your children somewhere safe. Let the reforms you fought for be your legacy instead of your graves. Lucian's voice was rough. And if we refuse, if we demand the execution we negotiated, then I'll grant it. But I'm asking you to choose life instead. Serafina felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd prepared herself for death, accepted it, made peace with trading her life for change that mattered. And now she was being offered something far more complicated: survival with purpose instead of death with meaning. She looked at Lucian, this man who'd saved her and destroyed himself trying to protect her, and saw the same question reflected in his eyes. Live or die. Both had value. Both had cost. I want to see my children again, she whispered. Then live, he said simply. They turned to the king together. We accept exile, Lucian said. The chamber erupted in chaos, nobles screaming that traitors deserved death, commoners cheering that justice had shown mercy, the magistrate hammering uselessly for order that wouldn't come. King Aldrich stood, silencing everyone through presence alone. So be it. Duke and Duchess Draven are stripped of all titles and holdings. They will leave the kingdom within 7 days and never return under penalty of immediate execution. Their children receive full pardons and restoration of the Vale family estates. He looked at them one final time. You changed this kingdom. Try not to destroy the next one you inhabit. The ship departed from the northern port on a morning wrapped in fog and salt air. Serafina stood at the rail with Isadora in her arms, and her other children pressed against her sides. Lucien stood beside her, no longer a duke, just a man who'd sacrificed everything for people he'd chosen to protect. Behind them, the kingdom receded into mist. Ahead lay foreign provinces and uncertain futures, and the possibility of building something better from the ruins of what they'd lost. Mrs. Halloway had stayed behind, too old for exile, but she'd gotten the children to safety, and that was enough. Captain Hale had been pardoned for his role in their escape, promoted to head of Palace Guard for his loyalty to justice over orders. The consortium was gone. The reforms were law. Workers had protections. Families had compensation. Everything they'd fought for had been achieved, just not the way they'd expected. Thomas leaned against the rail, watching his homeland disappear. Will we ever go back? No, Serafina said. Do you want to? She looked at Lucien, scarred and damaged and absolutely present, every day. But that's not the same as being able to. Catherine spoke quietly. Was it worth it? Everything we lost. Lucien knelt before her, this 8-year-old girl who'd seen too much death already. Your father believed justice mattered enough to die for. Your mother believed it mattered enough to fight for. We proved they were both right. That's worth everything we lost. Even our home. Home isn't a place. It's people. And we're all still here. Margaret, always the practical one, asked the question that actually mattered. Where are we going? North, Serafina said. To the coastal provinces. There's a town called Greyshore where workers from the southern mines have been settling. They're building something new, something better. And they'll accept us. They'll accept people who fought for them when no one else would. The ship cut through waves toward horizons that held possibility instead of certainty. Serafina held her children close and thought about Edmund, about everything he'd wanted for their family before power destroyed it. He'd believed in justice, in honor, in the idea that good people doing good work would eventually triumph over corruption. He'd been wrong about the method, but right about the principle. Sometimes justice required violence. Sometimes it required sacrifice. Sometimes it required giving up everything you'd built to ensure the next generation inherited something worth keeping. Lucien moved beside her, his hand finding hers naturally now. What are you thinking? That we won. We lost everything. No. We lost titles and holdings and the kingdom that never deserved us anyway. But we won the thing that mattered, which is, we proved that power doesn't make you untouchable, that corruption can be exposed, that people who fight for justice can actually win even when the cost is devastating. She looked at him fully. We proved that standing matters more than surviving, that some things are worth dying for, and when you're lucky enough to live instead, you honor that gift by building something better. Lucien smiled, genuine and almost peaceful. When did you become wiser than me? When you taught me everything you knew and then got out of the way. Fair enough. They stood together watching the kingdom fade while their children asked questions about the future and made plans for lives that didn't include nobility or titles or the weight of power. That night, while the children slept below deck, Serafina and Lucien stood beneath stars that looked the same whether you wore a crown or not. Do you think they'll remember us? She asked. The workers will. The families we helped? The people who read our testimony and demanded change. That's enough. Is it? He pulled her close. This woman who'd transformed from victim into warrior and kissed her with the kind of tenderness that only existed after surviving wars together. You taught me something, he said quietly. All those years I spent enforcing power, I thought strength meant never breaking. You showed me it means breaking and rebuilding anyway. Losing everything and finding ways to matter without it. That's not strength, that's just survival. No, survival is existing. What we did was living. There's a difference. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the ship carry them toward futures they'd build without titles or lands or anything except each other. In the distance, lightning flickered across horizons they'd never seen. Storms waiting, challenges ahead. The kind of uncertainties that came from starting over with nothing except will and each other. Serafina smiled. She'd survived worse. They both had. 5 years later in the coastal town of Greyshore, a school opened. Not fancy, just a building where workers' children could learn to read and calculate and understand the laws that govern their lives, where they could study history that didn't erase their struggles, where they could become educated enough to protect themselves from future exploitation. Serafina taught political theory and workers' rights. Lucien taught strategy and self-defense. Their children assisted, having grown into young adults who understood exactly what their parents had sacrificed and why. Thomas was 13, studying law with the kind of passion Edmund would have recognized. Catherine was 11, fluent in 5 languages, and translating workers' testimony into documents that spread through provinces faster than nobles could suppress them. Margaret was 9 and had already organized 3 strikes for better wages. Isadora was 5 and believed justice was as natural as breathing. The former Duke and Duchess of Blackmere had become teachers in a town that barely remembered their titles, but absolutely remembered what they'd fought for. Sometimes refugees arrived from the Southern Kingdom with news. The mining reforms were holding. Worker deaths had dropped by 80%. The compensation fund was actually distributing money to affected families. Nobles who tried to circumvent the new regulations found themselves prosecuted immediately. King Aldrich had died 2 years after their exile, old age claiming what politics couldn't. The new king had maintained the reforms, understanding that dismantling them would trigger revolution. The consortium was a memory. The corruption they'd exposed had become a teaching moment. Change had survived their absence. One evening, Serafina stood on the cliff overlooking Greyshore's harbor, watching ships arrive from distant provinces. Lucien appeared beside her, moving quieter now that his injuries had healed into permanent scars. Thinking about the kingdom, he asked. Thinking about how we changed it from here rather than there. Regrets. Every day. But not about leaving. He took her hand, calluses against calluses, 2 people shaped by violence who'd learned to build instead of destroy. The children want to know if we'll tell them the whole story. Everything that happened, everything we did. What do you think? I think they're old enough to understand that justice costs. That fighting corruption means becoming dangerous. That protecting people sometimes requires methods that look like the thing you're fighting against. That's a heavy lesson for children. They're not children anymore. They're survivors learning to thrive. They deserve truth. Then we tell them. They walked back to the house together, the structure they'd built with their own hands from wood and determination, where their children waited with questions about the past and plans for the future. That night, the entire family gathered while Serafina and Lucien told the story properly. Not the sanitized version. Not the heroic legend. The truth. About power and corruption and the price of fighting both. About making choices that seemed impossible and discovering you could survive them anyway. About losing everything except the things that actually mattered. When they finished, Thomas spoke first. So you won by losing. We lost battles and won the war, Lucien corrected. There's a difference. And you'd do it again, Catherine asked. Serafina looked at her children, these fierce, bright souls who'd inherited Edmund's principles, and Lucien's strength and her own refusal to surrender. Every single time, she said. Margaret, always practical, wanted strategy. What would you do differently? Start earlier, Lucien said. Build stronger alliances. Trust fewer people. But fundamentally, nothing. The outcome was worth the cost. Isadora, barely old enough to understand, asked the simplest question. Are we safe now? Serafina pulled her youngest daughter close. Safer. But safety isn't permanent. It's something you build and maintain and fight for every day. That seems hard. It is. But you're strong enough for hard things. The family sat together while the fire burned low and the future stretched ahead uncertain but possible. Outside, Greyshore slept peacefully, workers resting after honest labor, children dreaming about futures their parents were building. And in the house on the cliff, two people who'd been nobility and became something better taught their children the most important lesson. Power doesn't protect you. It isolates you. But purpose, community, and the willingness to fight for justice, even when it costs everything, those things survive long after titles and kingdoms crumble into dust. Later, when the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Serafina and Lucien stood on their porch, watching stars wheel overhead. Do you think Edmund would approve? She asked quietly. Of what you've become? Absolutely. I killed people, destroyed families, became exactly the kind of ruthless person he'd have opposed. You became someone who could protect what he believed in. That's different. Is it? Lucy Wan was quiet for a moment. Edmund believed justice should be gentle. You proved it needs to be fierce. Both are true. You just learned the harder lesson. She leaned against him, feeling the weight of years and choices and everything they'd survived pressing down like atmosphere. I miss him, she whispered. I know. And I love you. I know that too. They stood together in darkness that felt less like ending and more like beginning. Two people who'd learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building futures worth the cost. Somewhere in the Southern Kingdom, workers slept safely because of regulations written in blood and sacrifice. Children grew up with parents who came home from mines alive. Families received compensation for losses that could never truly be repaid, but were at least acknowledged. And in Greyshore, on a cliff overlooking the sea, two teachers prepared lessons for tomorrow about justice and power and the price of changing worlds. The storm had passed, the rebuilding continued, and that ultimately was victory enough.